I have a question for you before we start. Have you ever trusted someone and instantly regretted it? Comment yes or no below. And if you enjoy real, raw storytelling, like this video so I know to make more like it.
The bullet tore through Adrian Falcone's chest at precisely 10:47 p.m., 3 hours into his wedding reception. Isabella Rossi watched her new husband's blood bloom across white silk as screams shattered the ballroom's crystal chandeliers. But the nightmare didn't end with the gunfire. It began when Adrian's scarred younger brother emerged from the chaos, his cold eyes finding hers through the smoke. Marco Falcone didn't offer comfort. He offered ownership. Within an hour, she would be stripped, locked away, and transformed from bride to prisoner, all while her husband's body still lay warm. If you want to see how Isabella survives the darkness that's coming, stay until the end. And please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The Falcone villa stood like a Gothic fortress against the Italian countryside, all dark stone and iron gates that seemed designed to keep secrets in rather than intruders out. Isabella Rossi had arrived there 6 hours ago as a bride, dressed in ivory lace worth more than her father's entire estate. Now standing in the grand ballroom beneath chandeliers that scattered light like broken stars, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "You look pale," Adrian Falcone whispered, his hand gentle at the small of her back. "Are you feeling all right?" Isabella turned to face her husband of 3 hours and managed a smile. Adrian was handsome in an almost delicate way, soft brown eyes, a kind mouth, the sort of face that belonged in a university library rather than at the head of one of Italy's most powerful crime families. He was 28, only 3 years older than herself, and he'd been nothing but gentle since their families had arranged this union. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just overwhelmed. It's all so much." "I know." Adrian's thumb traced small circles against her spine, a gesture meant to soothe. "But you're safe now. That's what matters, isn't it? Your father's debts are cleared, your sister's medical bills are paid, and you'll never have to worry about money again." Safe. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. Isabella had traded herself for her family's survival, accepting a political marriage to a man she'd met exactly twice before today. The Rossi family had been drowning in debt to dangerous people, and the Falcone family had needed a respectable bride to legitimize Adrian's position as heir. A transaction dressed up in white lace and promises. "Dance with me," Adrian said, leading her toward the center of the ballroom where other couples swayed to orchestral music. "Let's at least try to enjoy this." Isabella let herself be guided into his arms, moving through the steps of a waltz she'd practiced for weeks. Around them, hundreds of guests filled the massive space, politicians, businessmen, and criminals, all wearing expensive suits and false smiles. The Falcone family's power was on full display tonight, a demonstration of wealth and influence that made Isabella feel very small. But it wasn't the crowd that made her skin prickle with unease. It was him. Marco Falcone stood alone in the shadows near the east wall, a glass of whiskey in his scarred hand. Adrian's younger brother was 26, only 1 year younger than his sibling, but the two men couldn't have been more different. Where Adrian was soft and kind, Marco was all sharp edges and barely contained violence. A jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow and continued down his cheek, the result of some past brutality that no one dared ask about. His black suit fit him like armor, emphasizing broad shoulders and a fighter's build. And he was staring directly at Isabella. She'd noticed his attention throughout the ceremony and reception, those cold, calculating eyes following her every movement. Not with desire exactly, though there was something dark and hungry in his gaze, more like assessment, like he was cataloging her weaknesses, measuring her value, determining exactly how much damage she could cause. "Don't mind Marco," Adrian murmured, noticing the direction of her glance. "He's always like that, suspicious of everyone." "He hates me." "No." Adrian spun her gently, moving them across the polished marble floor. "He hates the idea of me being vulnerable. Marco has spent his entire life protecting this family, doing the ugly work so the rest of us don't have to. He sees you as a potential weakness in our armor." "That's comforting," Adrian laughed softly. "He'll warm up to you eventually, once he realizes you're not a threat." But Isabella wasn't sure she believed that. Marco Falcone looked like a man who never warmed up to anything, who viewed the world through a lens of constant threat assessment. And right now, that lens was focused entirely on her. The waltz ended. Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple, chaste and sweet, then excused himself to greet an important senator who'd just arrived. Isabella found herself alone in the center of the ballroom, suddenly aware of how many eyes were watching her, evaluating the new Falcone bride. Wondering if she was strong enough to survive in this world. She needed air. Isabella slipped through the crowd toward the terrace doors, ignoring the curious glances that followed her. Outside, the October night was cool against her overheated skin. The terrace overlooked formal gardens that stretched into darkness, hedges cut into geometric patterns that looked almost threatening in the moonlight. Running away already? Isabella's heart jumped. She spun to find Marco Falcone emerging from the shadows near the doorway, whiskey glass still in hand. Up close, he was even more intimidating, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, built like someone who knew exactly how to hurt people. "I needed some air," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "The crowd is overwhelming." "Get used to it." Marco moved to stand beside her at the stone railing, his body language carefully controlled. "You're a Falcone now. Everything you do will be watched, judged, used against us if you're not careful." Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." He took a slow sip of whiskey, his gaze fixed on the dark gardens below. "You have no idea what you've walked into, Isabella Rossi. No idea what this family really is." "I know exactly what this family is," Isabella countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "And I know why I'm here. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. I'm not naive enough to believe otherwise." Something flickered across Marco's scarred face. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. "At least you're honest about it. That's more than most people who marry into this world." "What do you want from me?" Isabella turned to face him fully, tired of the games and subtle threats. "You've been staring at me all night like I'm some kind of problem you need to solve. So just say it. What's your issue with me?" Marco's jaw tightened. For a long moment he didn't speak, just studied her face with those cold, analytical eyes. Then, finally, "You make him weak." "Adrian?" "He's falling for you." Marco's voice was flat, emotionless. "I can see it. The way he looks at you, touches you, tries to protect you. He's developing actual feelings, which means you've become a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities in this family get people killed." Isabella's breath caught. There was something in the way Marco said it, not with anger, but with certainty, like he was stating an inevitable fact. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "Any of it. I was sold to your family to clear my father's debts. I'm trying to make the best of an impossible situation." "I know." Marco drained his whiskey in one swift motion. "That's what makes it worse. If you were a scheming gold digger, I could deal with you easily. But you're just a frightened girl playing a role she never wanted, and somehow that's more dangerous." Before Isabella could respond, the sound of shattering glass erupted from inside the ballroom. Then screaming, then gunfire. Marco moved with frightening speed, grabbing Isabella's arm and yanking her down behind the stone railing as bullets sprayed across the terrace. Inside the ballroom, chaos exploded. More gunshots, more screams, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. "Stay down!" Marco ordered, his hand pressing against her shoulder to keep her low. He'd already drawn a gun from somewhere inside his jacket, his entire demeanor shifting from brooding observer to lethal predator in seconds. "What's happening?" Isabella's voice shook. "We're under attack." Marco's eyes scanned the gardens below, looking for threats. Someone just declared war on the Falcone family. More gunfire erupted inside. Isabella could hear people crying, shouting, running. The beautiful wedding reception had transformed into a massacre in seconds. "Adrian," Isabella breathed. "I need to get to Adrian. You need to stay exactly where you are," Marco snapped. But even as he said it, his attention was pulled toward the ballroom, toward his brother. For just a moment, Isabella saw something crack through his cold exterior. Fear. Real, visceral fear. Then Marco was moving, leaving her crouched behind the railing as he charged back into the chaos. Isabella should have stayed hidden, should have done exactly what he said. But the image of Adrian alone in that ballroom, surrounded by gunfire, overrode every survival instinct. She ran after Marco. The ballroom was a war zone. Bodies lay scattered across the marble floor, blood pooling beneath overturned chairs and shattered champagne flutes. Wedding guests screamed and scrambled for exits while men in black tactical gear fired methodically into the crowd. Isabella saw Senator Romano go down, saw the Marconi family's matriarch clutching her bleeding shoulder. And there, in the center of the room, she saw Adrian. Her husband was on his knees, one hand pressed against his chest where crimson bloomed across white fabric. His gentle face was twisted in pain and confusion, those kind eyes searching the chaos as if trying to understand how his wedding had become his execution. "Adrian!" Isabella's scream cut through the gunfire. His head turned toward her voice. Their eyes met across the carnage. And in that moment, Isabella saw him try to smile. Even bleeding, even dying, he tried to smile for her. Then another shot rang out. Adrian's body jerked backward, and he collapsed. Isabella was running before she could think, her ivory wedding dress staining red as she dropped to her knees beside her husband. Blood. There was so much blood, hot and wet against her hands as she pressed them against the wound in his chest. "No, no, no," she chanted, her voice breaking. "Adrian, stay with me. Please stay with me." Adrian's hand found hers, his grip weak. "Isabella?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I wanted to protect you. Don't talk. Save your strength." Tears blurred her vision. Around them, the gunfire had stopped, the attackers retreating as quickly as they'd appeared. But it was too late. Too late for Adrian. Too late for any of this. "Tell Marco," Adrian coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Tell him—" "I tried." "Tell him yourself," Isabella sobbed. "You're going to be fine. You're going to—" But Adrian's eyes were already glazing over, his hand going limp in hers. Isabella felt the exact moment life left his body, felt him become nothing more than cooling flesh and empty promises. She was still holding him when Marco appeared. Adrian's younger brother stood over them, his scarred face expressionless as he looked down at his dead sibling. No tears, no rage, just cold, terrible assessment. The gun in his hand was still warm from firing, and Isabella realized with distant horror that he'd killed at least some of the attackers. "He's gone," Marco said flatly. "I know." Isabella couldn't stop touching Adrian's face, as if her hands could somehow anchor his soul to his body. "I know he's gone. Get up." "What? Get up?" Marco's voice was ice. "We need to secure the villa, now." "He's dead," Isabella said, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Your brother is dead, and you want me to just—" Marco grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet with bruising force. "My brother is dead, which means I'm in charge now. And you will do exactly what I say when I say it, or you'll end up just like him. Do you understand?" Isabella stared at him, shocked by the sudden transformation. This wasn't grief or shock. This was Marco Falcone stepping fully into his role as the new head of the family. Ruthless, efficient, completely devoid of mercy. "Do you understand?" he repeated, his fingers digging into her arm. "Yes," Isabella whispered. "Good." Marco released her and turned to address the armed men who'd appeared. Falcone security, too late to stop the massacre, but ready to secure the aftermath. "Lock down the villa. No one leaves until I've questioned them personally. Get the bodies cataloged and start pulling security footage. I want the names of everyone who was on that assault team within the hour." The men scattered to follow his orders. Marco turned back to Isabella, his cold gaze traveling over her blood-soaked wedding dress. "Come with me," he said. "Where? Now." Marco didn't wait for her compliance. He simply grabbed her wrist and pulled her away from Adrian's body, away from the ballroom full of death and shattered dreams. Isabella stumbled after him, her mind still trying to process the impossible shift from bride to widow in less than 4 hours. He led her through corridors she didn't recognize, deeper into the villa's private wings. Other family members tried to stop them, Adrian's mother sobbing hysterically, various uncles and cousins demanding answers, but Marco cut through them all with cold efficiency, issuing orders and making decisions without breaking stride. They finally stopped at a heavy wooden door. Marco pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked it, shoving the door open to reveal a lavish bedroom decorated in deep burgundy and gold, a prison disguised as luxury. "Inside," he ordered. Isabella didn't move. "What are you doing?" Protecting you, whether you want it or not. Marco's hand settled against the small of her back, the same place Adrian had touched her earlier, but this contact was nothing like his brother's gentle guidance. This was a claim, a brand. You're a widow now, Isabella, Adrian's widow, which makes you either the most valuable bargaining chip this family has or the most dangerous liability. I haven't decided which yet. You can't just lock me away. I can do whatever I want. Marco pushed her gently but firmly into the room. I'm the head of the Falcone family now, and until I figure out who ordered that attack and why, you stay here, safe, contained, mine to control. This is insane. This is survival. Marco's scarred face was inches from hers now, his breath warm against her skin. Someone just tried to decapitate our entire operation. They killed my brother on his wedding night, which means this was personal, symbolic. And until I understand the message they were sending, I'm not taking any chances with the variables. I'm not a variable, Isabella said, her voice shaking with anger and grief and fear. I'm a person. Adrian's wife, Adrian's widow. Marco's correction was cruel. And you'll stay locked in this room until I decide otherwise. Men will be posted outside. You'll be fed, clothed, and kept comfortable. But you will not leave. You will not contact your family. You will not do anything without my explicit permission. Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to fight. But the cold finality in Marco's eyes told her it would be useless. He'd made his decision, and nothing she said would change it. Why? She asked quietly. If I'm such a liability, why not just kill me too? Something dark flickered across Marco's face. Because you might still be useful. And because he stopped himself, jaw tightening. Because Adrian would have wanted you protected, even from yourself. Before Isabella could respond, Marco stepped back and slammed the door. She heard the key turn in the lock, heard his footsteps retreating down the corridor, and then she was alone. Isabella stood in the center of the luxurious prison, still wearing her blood-stained wedding dress, still feeling the ghost of Adrian's hand going limp in hers. The room was beautiful, four-poster bed, antique furniture, windows that overlooked the gardens, but the bars were there all the same, invisible but absolute. She'd entered the Falcone villa as a bride. She'd become a widow, and now she was a prisoner. Isabella walked to the window and looked out at the dark gardens below. Somewhere in this massive estate, Adrian's body was growing cold. Somewhere, Marco was beginning his hunt for revenge. And somewhere, she suspected, the people who'd ordered this attack were watching to see what happened next. The beautiful lie of her wedding day had shattered completely. Now came the truth. And Isabella had the terrible feeling that the bloodshed had only just begun. Continued in next response. The night passed in fragments that Isabella couldn't quite piece together. At some point, two older women appeared, servants, though they moved with the efficiency of prison guards, and stripped her out of the ruined wedding dress. They worked in silence, their faces carefully neutral as they cleaned Adrian's blood from her skin with warm cloths that smelled of lavender. Then they dressed her in black. A simple dress that covered everything, made her look like exactly what she was, a widow in mourning. The wedding dress disappeared. Isabella didn't ask where. The servants left food, bread, cheese, fruit that she couldn't bring herself to touch, and then locked the door again from the outside. Through the windows, she watched dawn break over the gardens, painting everything in shades of gray and gold that seemed obscene in their beauty. Adrian was dead. The thought kept circling through her mind, refusing to settle into reality. The kind man she'd married yesterday was gone. Murdered in front of hundreds of witnesses, and she'd felt his life drain away beneath her hands, and now his brother had locked her away like a piece of valuable property, a chess piece to be moved at his convenience. Isabella pressed her forehead against the cool glass and tried not to scream. Footsteps in the corridor made her turn, multiple sets, moving with purpose. The door unlocked and Marco entered, followed by an older man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This is Vincent Calabrese," Marco said without preamble. "Our family's attorney. He needs to ask you some questions about last night." Vincent had kind eyes that reminded Isabella painfully of Adrian. "Mrs. Falcone, I'm very sorry for your loss. I know this is difficult, but we need to establish a timeline. Can you tell me exactly what happened from your perspective? Mrs. Falcone. The name felt like a brand burning into her identity. She was no longer Isabella Rossi. That girl had died with her husband. I was on the terrace, she began, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears, talking to Marco. Then we heard glass breaking, gunshots. He told me to stay down, but I went inside. I saw Adrian. He was already shot. Did you recognize any of the attackers? Vincent pulled out a notepad, his pen poised. No, they were wearing masks, black tactical gear. How many? I don't know, 6? 8? Everything happened so fast. Marco stood near the window, his arms crossed, listening without apparent emotion. But Isabella noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw kept clenching and releasing. He wasn't as cold as he pretended to be. Did Adrian say anything to you before he died? Vincent asked gently. Isabella's throat tightened. He apologized, said he wanted to protect me, and he told me to tell Marco. Tell Marco that he tried. Silence fell over the room. Vincent stopped writing, and for just a moment, Isabella saw Marco's mask crack, actual pain flashing across his scarred face before he locked it down again. That's enough, Marco said abruptly. Vincent, compile the witness statements and security footage. I want a full report by noon. Of course. Vincent stood, offering Isabella a sympathetic look. Again, my condolences, Mrs. Falcone. If you need anything, she has everything she needs, Marco interrupted. Thank you, Vincent. The attorney left, and Isabella was alone with Marco again. He stayed by the window, his back to her, staring out at the gardens where sunshine made everything look deceptively peaceful. Your family sent a message, Marco said finally. Your father, your mother, your sister, they asked about your well-being. Hope flared in Isabella's chest. Can I see them? No. What? Why not? Marco turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Because they've already been compensated for your marriage. The Falcone family honored our agreement. Your father's debts are cleared, your sister's medical expenses paid in full, your parents given a comfortable pension. In exchange, you became ours, permanently. I'm a person, not property. In this world, you're whatever I say you are. Marco moved closer, his presence filling the room like a physical force. And right now, you're a widow who represents significant political capital. Adrian's death will be used to justify everything I do next. The grieving brother seeking justice for his murdered sibling. You're the symbol that legitimizes my actions. Isabella's hands curled into fists. So I'm just a prop in your revenge plot. You're a survivor in a very dangerous game. Marco's voice softened fractionally. I know you don't understand this yet, but keeping you locked away is the kindest thing I can do. The people who killed Adrian, they'll be watching to see how we respond. If they think you matter to this family, if they think you're a weakness, they'll come for you too. Then let me go, Isabella pleaded. Send me away, back to my family, to another country, anywhere. I don't want to be part of this. It's too late for that. Marco's scarred hand reached out and Isabella flinched, but he didn't touch her. His fingers stopped inches from her face, hovering in the air between them. The moment you married Adrian, you became a Falcone, and Falcones don't run. We fight, we endure, we survive. I didn't choose this. None of us chose this. Marco's hand dropped. But here we are anyway. He turned to leave, and Isabella felt panic surge through her. As much as she hated him, hated being locked away, he was the only human contact she had, the only person who seemed real in this nightmare. Marco, she called out. Wait. He paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. Why did you really lock me in here? Isabella asked. The truth, not the strategic reasons or the political justifications, the real reason. Marco's shoulders tensed. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then so quietly she almost didn't hear. Because I couldn't protect Adrian, but I can protect you, whether you want me to or not. Then he was gone, the door locking behind him with terrible finality. Isabella sank onto the edge of the massive bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for Adrian's kindness that would never touch anyone again. She cried for her own stolen future, for the life she'd never get to live. She cried until her body was empty of tears, until she was nothing but hollow exhaustion. And somewhere in the villa below, Marco Falcone was beginning his war. The days blurred together. Isabella lost track of time in her gilded cage, measuring the hours by the servants who brought her meals and changed her sheets with practiced silence. They never spoke to her, never met her eyes, just performed their duties and disappeared. Through her window, she watched the Falcone villa transform. More guards appeared on the grounds, armed men patrolling in rotating shifts. Black cars came and went at all hours. She could feel the tension building, could sense the gathering storm even from her isolation. On the third day, or was it the fourth, she heard screaming from somewhere in the villa. A man's voice, pleading, begging, then silence. On the fifth day, one of the servants left a newspaper with her breakfast tray. The headline read, "Falcone Family Strikes Back. 3 rival organizations decimated in coordinated attacks." Marco was keeping his promise. He was hunting down everyone responsible. Isabella read the article 3 times, studying the list of casualties. Men she'd never heard of, families she didn't recognize. But one name caught her attention. Paolo Marchetti, found dead in his penthouse with a single bullet between his eyes. The article mentioned he'd been suspected of planning the wedding massacre. That night, Marco came to see her. He looked different, harder somehow, like the violence of the past week had stripped away whatever humanity he'd been holding on to. His knuckles were bruised. There was a new cut along his jawline, and his eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from doing terrible things and not letting yourself feel them. "I thought you should know," he said without greeting. "We've identified most of the assault team. 7 of the 8 shooters are dead." Isabella set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "And the 8th? "Still looking, but we'll find him." Marco walked to her window, looking out at the dark gardens. "I've also started dismantling the 3 families who financed the attack. The Marchettis, the Santoros, the De Lucas. By the end of the month, they won't exist anymore." "How many people have you killed?" The question slipped out before Isabella could stop it. Marco's laugh was bitter. "You don't want that answer, Isabella. Trust me. I want to understand what's happening. I'm locked in this room while you're out there starting a war, and I have no idea why Adrian had to die." "Because he was weak." Marco's voice was flat. "Because he wanted to legitimize our family, pull us out of the criminal world and into legitimate business. He thought he could reform the Falcone empire from the inside, make us respectable, and there were people who couldn't allow that. So they killed him. They made an example of him, showed the underworld what happens to crime families who try to go soft." Marco's reflection in the window was ghostly, insubstantial. "Adrian's vision died with him. Now we go back to what we've always been, what I've always been." Isabella stood and moved closer, drawn despite herself to this dangerous, damaged man. "And what's that?" Marco finally turned to face her. In the lamplight, his scar looked even more severe, a permanent reminder of violence survived. "A monster, Isabella. I'm the thing that goes bump in the night, the name that makes hardened criminals check their locks twice. Adrian was the dream of what the Falcone family could become. I'm the nightmare of what we actually are." "You don't have to be," Isabella heard herself say. "You could choose differently. Honor Adrian's memory by continuing his vision. His vision got him killed." Marco's voice turned harsh. "And if you think I'm going to make the same mistake, you're more naive than I thought. The only way to survive in this world is to be more ruthless than everyone else, more willing to do what others won't. That's what keeps this family alive." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Isabella challenged. "That all this violence, all this death, is just survival?" "It's the truth. It's an excuse." Isabella was surprised by her own boldness, but something about Marco's presence pulled honesty from her like blood from a wound. "You could choose mercy. You could choose to be different, but that would require you to admit that maybe Adrian was right. That maybe there's another way." Marco's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're afraid." The words hung between them, dangerous and true. "I saw your face when Adrian died. I saw you terrified for the first time in your life, and instead of dealing with that fear, you're drowning it in revenge." For a moment, Isabella thought Marco might hit her. His hand moved, fingers curling into a fist. But then something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but cracking, revealing the grief beneath the rage. "He was my brother," Marco said quietly. "My responsibility. I spent my entire life in the shadows, doing the dirty work, making the hard choices, all so Adrian could stay clean, stay good. And it didn't matter. They killed him anyway." "I know." Isabella's anger faded, replaced by shared loss. "I know it hurts." "You don't know anything," Marco repeated, but the heat was gone from his voice. "You knew him for a few weeks. I knew him for 26 years. Then tell me about him." Isabella sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted. "Tell me who Adrian really was. Because I married a kind stranger, and I'd like to believe he was worth the cost." Marco hesitated. Then, to Isabella's surprise, he sat down in the armchair across from her bed. Not close, but not leaving either. A middle ground that felt almost like trust. "Adrian was—" Marco's voice was rough. "He was everything I wasn't. Smart without being cruel, strong without needing violence. He actually believed people could change, could be better. Even in this family, surrounded by criminals and killers, he somehow stayed hopeful." Sounds like he was wasted on the Falcone Empire. "He was. But our father saw potential in him, saw a way to legitimize the family name, wash the blood off our money. So Adrian got sent to the best schools, trained in business and law, groomed to be the respectable face of our operation. While you did the wet work." Marco's smile was sharp. "Someone had to. Adrian couldn't get his hands dirty. It would have broken him. So I became the enforcer, the problem solver, the one who made people disappear when necessary." Isabella studied Marco's scarred face, trying to reconcile the cold killer with the grieving brother sitting across from her. "Did you resent him for it?" "Every day." Marco's honesty was startling. "I resented that he got to stay clean while I waded through blood. I resented that our father loved him more, trusted him more, saw him as the future. And I especially resented that Adrian never asked for any of it. He would have given up the inheritance in a heartbeat if it meant I could have a normal life." "But you wouldn't let him." "No." Marco's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "Because I knew what would happen if Adrian walked away. The empire would fall apart. Rival families would see weakness and attack. Everything our father built would crumble. So I made sure Adrian stayed exactly where he needed to be. Even if it killed him." The words hit Marco like a physical blow. His expression shuddered, and Isabella immediately regretted her cruelty. But it was true, and they both knew it. "Yes," Marco said finally, "even though it killed him." Silence filled the room. Outside, night had fallen completely, turning the windows into dark mirrors that reflected their separate isolation. Two people bound by tragedy, separated by choice. "I should go," Marco said, standing. "I have meetings in the morning. The Santoro family's lawyer wants to negotiate terms for their surrender." "Will you let them surrender?" "No." Marco's voice was ice again, the moment of vulnerability locked away. "They helped murder my brother. They all die." He moved toward the door, and Isabella knew she should let him go, should maintain the distance between prisoner and captor, widow and executioner. But something stopped her. "Marco," she called. "Thank you for telling me about Adrian." He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "He would have wanted you to know. Would have wanted someone to remember him as more than just another dead Falcone." "I'll remember," Isabella promised. "However long you keep me locked in here, I'll remember him." Marco didn't respond. He just opened the door and disappeared into the corridor, leaving Isabella alone once more. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had cracked, and Isabella suspected that crack was more dangerous than anything else in this deadly game. The next morning brought unexpected freedom, though Isabella quickly realized it was just another form of control. Marco appeared at her door with two armed guards flanking him, his expression unreadable in the harsh morning light filtering through the corridor windows. "Get dressed," he said without preamble. "Something appropriate for morning. We have a funeral to attend." Isabella's heart clenched. Adrian's funeral? The family decided to hold a private ceremony. Just close relatives and essential associates. You need to be there. Marco's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. You have 20 minutes. He left the guards outside her door while she changed into the black dress the servants had provided days ago. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, hair that hung limp and lifeless. The vibrant girl who'd arrived here as a bride had been replaced by this hollow ghost. When she emerged, Marco was waiting. He'd traded his usual dark suit for formal mourning attire that made him look even more severe. The scar across his face seemed to stand out more prominently against the black fabric, a reminder of violence that never quite healed. "Stay close to me," Marco instructed as they walked through the villa's corridors. "Don't speak unless spoken to directly, and whatever you see today, whatever you feel, you keep it contained. Understood?" "I'm burying my husband," Isabella said quietly. "I think I'm entitled to my grief." "You're entitled to whatever I allow you." Marco's hand settled at the small of her back, guiding her through a set of heavy oak doors. "And today, what I need is for you to play the devastated widow perfectly. Our enemies are watching, always watching." The funeral was held in the villa's private chapel, a Gothic space with vaulted ceilings and stained glass that painted everything in shades of blue and crimson. Adrian's casket sat at the front, closed. Isabella was grateful she wouldn't have to see his face again, wouldn't have to reconcile the kind man she'd known with the corpse he'd become. About 30 people filled the pews, all dressed in black, all wearing expressions of practiced grief. Isabella recognized Adrian's mother, a tiny woman who looked like she'd aged a decade in the past week. Various uncles, cousins, family lawyers, and at the back, standing like silent sentinels, were the men who did Marco's dirty work, the enforcers who carried out his orders without question. Marco guided Isabella to the front pew, positioning her beside Adrian's mother. The older woman reached out and gripped Isabella's hand with surprising strength, her fingers cold and trembling. "He loved you," she whispered. "In such a short time, he really loved you." Isabella's throat tightened. She wanted to say that she'd been learning to love him too, that given time, they might have built something real from their arranged beginning. But the words stuck, and all she could do was squeeze the woman's hand in silent acknowledgement. The service was brief and impersonal. A priest, though Marco had somehow arranged for one despite the family's criminal nature, spoke in platitudes about eternal rest and divine mercy. No one mentioned how Adrian had actually died. No one acknowledged that this was a murder disguised as a funeral. When it came time to speak, Marco rose and approached the casket. His scarred hand rested on the polished wood, and for a moment Isabella saw genuine emotion flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "My brother believed in redemption," Marco said, his voice carrying through the chapel. "He believed people could change, that our family could evolve beyond its history. He was wrong about that, but he was right that some things are worth fighting for." His gaze swept across the gathered mourners. "Adrian's death will not be in vain. Every person responsible will answer for what they've done. This I promise." It wasn't a eulogy, it was a declaration of war. After the service, they moved to the family cemetery behind the villa, a gated plot where generations of Falcones lay buried beneath marble headstones and elaborate monuments. Adrian's grave had been prepared between their father's tomb and an empty plot that Isabella realized with creeping horror was probably reserved for Marco. She stood at the graveside as they lowered the casket, feeling disconnected from her own body. This couldn't be real. 3 weeks ago, she'd been living in her family's modest apartment, working as a nurse's assistant, dreaming of someday having enough money to finish her degree. Now she was watching them bury a husband she barely knew, trapped in a criminal empire she didn't understand, controlled by a man who terrified her. Marco stood beside her throughout, his presence both protective and threatening. When the first shovel of dirt hit the casket, Isabella felt her knees buckle. Marco's arm immediately wrapped around her waist, holding her upright. "I can't do this," she whispered. "You can," Marco murmured back. "You're stronger than you think." "How would you know? You've kept me locked away like a prisoner." "Exactly, and you haven't broken yet." There was something almost like admiration in his voice. "Most people would have shattered by now, but you're still fighting, still angry. That takes strength." The grave was filled. The mourners began to disperse, offering quiet condolences to Adrian's mother before departing in their black cars. Isabella noticed how they all deferred to Marco now, how they watched him with a mixture of respect and fear, that no one had ever shown Adrian. Power had shifted. The gentle heir was dead. The monster had taken his throne. "Come," Marco said when the cemetery had emptied. "We need to talk." He led Isabella away from Adrian's grave, through the cemetery gates and into the formal gardens beyond. They walked in silence for several minutes, following stone pathways between precisely manicured hedges. Finally, Marco stopped beside an ornate fountain where water trickled over marble cherubs frozen in eternal play. "Your imprisonment ends today," he said. Isabella's head snapped up. "What?" "You're being moved to the family's main residence in the city, the Palazzo." Marco pulled out a cigarette, lit it with practiced efficiency. "You'll have more freedom there. Your own suite, access to most of the building, staff to attend to your needs." "Why?" Isabella couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. "What changed?" "Strategy." Marco exhaled smoke into the cool air. "Keeping you locked away served its purpose initially. It kept you safe while I dealt with immediate threats. But now I need you visible. The grieving widow of Adrian Falcone, living in the heart of our empire. It sends a message. That you're using me as a symbol. That the Falcone family protects its own. That even in tragedy, we maintain our strength." Marco's eyes fixed on her, calculating. "You'll attend certain social functions with me, charity galas, political dinners, business meetings where a respectable presence is required. You'll smile, look appropriately sad, and remind everyone that Adrian's death hasn't weakened us." Isabella's hands clenched at her sides. "And if I refuse?" "You won't." It wasn't a threat, just certainty. "Because the alternative is going back to that locked room, and we both know you'd rather take your chances with limited freedom than complete isolation." He was right, and Isabella hated him for it. But she also couldn't deny the relief flooding through her at the prospect of leaving the villa, of seeing something beyond those four walls. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Today. Your belongings are already being packed." Marco flicked ash from his cigarette. "There are rules, of course. You don't leave the palazzo without my permission. You don't contact your family without supervision. You don't speak to the press under any circumstances. And you especially don't try to run." "What happens if I do?" Marco's smile was cold. "Then I'll find you, and the consequences will be severe enough that you'll wish you'd stayed." "You'd hurt me?" "I do what's necessary to protect this family's interests." Marco moved closer, invading her space in a way that made her pulse quicken. "But it won't come to that. Because despite what you think of me, Isabella, I'm not your enemy. I'm the only thing standing between you and the people who killed Adrian. The people you're systematically murdering. Yes. No shame, no hesitation. And I'll keep killing them until every last person involved is dead. That's what Adrian would have wanted, even if he wouldn't have had the stomach to do it himself." Isabella studied Marco's face, trying to understand the man behind the monster. "Do you ever feel guilty about the things you do?" "Every single day." The admission surprised her. "But guilt is a luxury I can't afford, so I bury it, and I do what needs to be done, and I live with the consequences." Before Isabella could respond, one of Marco's men appeared on the path, a tall, broad-shouldered enforcer named Dante, who seemed to serve as Marco's right hand. "Boss," Dante said, nodding respectfully. "We've got a situation. The eighth shooter from the wedding. We found him." Marco's entire demeanor shifted, tension coiling through his body like a predator scenting prey. "Where?" "Safe house in Napoli. Our informant confirmed the location an hour ago." "Prep the team. I want him alive." Marco glanced at Isabella. "Take Mrs. Falcone to the city. Get her settled in the palazzo. I'll join you tonight." "Understood." Dante gestured for Isabella to follow him, but Isabella stayed rooted in place, looking at Marco. "You're going after him now? Right after the funeral?" "This is what I do, Isabella. This is who I am." Marco stubbed out his cigarette. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us." Then he was striding away, already pulling out his phone to coordinate the operation. Isabella watched him go. This man who'd buried his brother in the morning and would torture information from a captive by nightfall. "Mrs. Falcone," Dante said gently, "we should go." The drive to the city took 2 hours through winding Italian countryside that gradually gave way to urban sprawl. Isabella sat in the back of an armored sedan, Dante in the front passenger seat, while a driver she didn't know navigated traffic with efficient precision. Two more cars followed. Security, she assumed. Marco wasn't taking chances with her safety. The Falcone Palazzo sat in the historic district, a massive Renaissance building that took up an entire city block. 4 stories of honey-colored stone, wrought iron balconies, and windows that gleamed like watching eyes. Isabella felt small approaching it, dwarfed by the weight of history and power the building represented. Inside was even more overwhelming. Marble floors, frescoed ceilings, antique furniture that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Staff moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency, all of them pausing to offer respectful nods as Dante led Isabella through the maze of rooms. "This will be your suite," Dante said, opening double doors to reveal a living space that was larger than her family's entire apartment had been. "Bedroom through there, bathroom is en suite. Private balcony overlooking the courtyard. If you need anything, there's a phone on the desk that connects directly to the staff." Isabella walked into the room, her footsteps echoing on polished marble. Everything was decorated in soft creams and golds, elegant without being ostentatious. A prison, but a gilded one. "Am I allowed to leave this room?" she asked. "You have access to most of the palazzo," Dante replied. "The ground floor, the gardens, the library on the second floor. Marco's private office and the east wing are off limits. There will always be security nearby, but they'll try to be discreet. So I'm still a prisoner, just with a longer leash." Dante's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Falcone, I think you're handling this better than anyone expected. Most people would have broken by now." "That's what Marco said." "Because it's true. You're stronger than you look." Dante moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to get settled. Dinner will be brought up at 7, unless you'd prefer to eat in the main dining room." "Alone in a giant dining room sounds depressing. I'll eat here." "As you wish." Dante paused in the doorway. "And Mrs. Falcone? For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Adrian. He was a good man." Then he was gone, and Isabella was alone again. She explored her new prison methodically, opening drawers and closets to find them already filled with clothes in her size, all black or dark colors, appropriate for a widow in mourning. Someone had been very thorough in preparing for her arrival. The balcony overlooked an interior courtyard where a fountain bubbled peacefully, surrounded by manicured gardens. From this height, Isabella could see over the palazzo's walls to the city beyond, buildings and streets and normal life happening just out of reach. She thought about running. The balcony wasn't that high, and there were probably ways to slip past security if she was clever enough. But then what? Marco would find her, just as he'd promised. And even if she made it back to her family, she'd only be bringing danger to their doorstep. No, she was trapped here, bound by invisible chains stronger than any lock. Isabella returned inside and was examining the bookshelves. Someone had stocked them with classics and contemporary novels, when a knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called. A young woman entered, probably close to Isabella's own age, carrying a tray with tea and pastries. She had kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Falcone, I'm Sophia. I've been assigned as your personal attendant." She set the tray on a low table. "If you need anything, clothes pressed, meals prepared, assistance with anything at all, you just need to ask." "Thank you, Sophia." Isabella studied the girl's face. "Have you worked for the Falcone family long?" 3 years, ma'am, since I was 19. Sophia poured tea with practiced grace. "I started in the kitchens, but Mrs. Falcone, Adrian's mother, she noticed I had a talent for organization and promoted me." "You knew Adrian then?" Sophia's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Oh yes, ma'am. He was always so kind to the staff. He'd remember our names, ask about our families. Not many of the family members do that." She caught herself, looking suddenly anxious. "Not that the others aren't perfectly proper, of course. It's all right, Sophia. I understand what you mean." Isabella accepted the tea gratefully. Adrian was different from the rest of them. He really was. Sophia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "If you don't mind me saying, ma'am, I think he would have been happy to know you're being looked after. Even though the circumstances are terrible?" "Yes, ma'am." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, Isabella sipping tea while Sophia straightened items that didn't need straightening. Finally, the girl worked up her courage to speak again. Mrs. Falcone, may I ask you something? Of course. Are you all right? I know it's not my place, but you seem so sad. And not just because of Mr. Adrian's death. You seem trapped. Isabella laughed bitterly. That's because I am trapped, Sophia. In this palazzo, in this life, in a role I never wanted. But Mr. Marco, he's protecting you. Mr. Marco is using me. Isabella set down her teacup with more force than necessary. I'm a convenient symbol, the grieving widow who legitimizes his revenge. Sophia bit her lip, clearly torn between loyalty to the family and sympathy for Isabella. He's not as terrible as people say, you know, Mr. Marco. He does what he has to do, but he's not cruel for the sake of it. You sound like you admire him. I respect him. Sophia chose her words carefully. He's kept this family together through impossible circumstances, and he takes care of the people who serve him loyally. My mother needed surgery last year, expensive surgery we could never afford. Mr. Marco paid for all of it without being asked. Isabella absorbed this new information, trying to reconcile it with the cold killer she knew. Marco Falcone was becoming increasingly difficult to categorize: monster and protector, murderer and benefactor, the man who locked her away and the one who ensured she was comfortable in captivity. Thank you for telling me that, Isabella said finally. Sophia smiled and stood. I'll leave you to rest, ma'am. If you need anything at all, just pick up the phone. After Sophia left, Isabella found herself restless. She paced the suite, examined every corner, tried to read but couldn't focus. Finally, remembering Dante's instructions about having access to most of the palazzo, she decided to explore. The corridors were quiet, her footsteps echoing on marble floors as she wandered. She found the library Dante had mentioned, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and reading nooks tucked into alcoves. The main dining room was exactly as depressing as she'd imagined, a massive table that could seat 30 surrounded by portraits of dead Falcones. On the ground floor, she discovered a music room with a grand piano. Isabella hadn't played in years, not since before her family's financial troubles began. But now, alone in the palazzo with nothing but time and grief, she sat at the bench and let her fingers find the keys. She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the melancholy melody filling the empty room. The piano was perfectly tuned, and the acoustics were beautiful. For a few minutes, Isabella lost herself in the music, forgetting about Marco and Adrian and the impossible situation she'd found herself in. When she finished, applause startled her. Marco stood in the doorway, still wearing the dark clothes from the funeral, though his jacket was gone and his sleeves were rolled up. There was blood on his shirt cuff. Not much, just a small spray of crimson that he hadn't bothered to clean. I didn't know you played, he said. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she pulled them from the keys. I didn't know you were back. Just arrived. Marco moved into the room, his footsteps silent despite his size. The operation in Napoli was successful. We have our 8th shooter. And I assume he's still alive, given that you needed to question him? For now. Marco's tone was casual, as if they were discussing the weather rather than torture. He'll talk. They always do eventually. Isabella stood, putting the piano bench between them like a barrier. You have blood on your sleeve. Marco glanced down, noticing the stain for the first time. So I do. He didn't seem bothered by it. Did you kill someone today, Marco? Several someones, actually. He met her gaze directly. Does that shock you? Nothing about you shocks me anymore. Isabella crossed her arms. You buried your brother this morning and spent the afternoon hunting down his killers. It's exactly what I expected. Good. Then you're learning. Marco moved closer, and Isabella fought the urge to retreat. How do you like the palazzo? It's beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. Most beautiful things are. Marco stopped just close enough that Isabella could smell gunpowder and expensive cologne. Did Dante explain the rules? Don't leave without permission, don't contact family, don't run away or face unspecified consequences. I think I have them memorized. There's one more rule I didn't mention. Marco's voice dropped lower. You don't lie to me, ever. I'll tolerate your anger, your grief, even your hatred, but I won't accept deception. Why? You lie all the time. Exactly. I'm very good at it, which means I can always tell when someone else is lying to me. His scarred hand reached out, and Isabella forced herself to stay still as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I need to trust that you'll be honest with me, Isabella. It's the only way this arrangement works. This isn't an arrangement. It's captivity. Call it what you want. Marco's fingers lingered against her cheek for a moment before dropping away. But we're bound together now, whether either of us likes it. My enemies see you as my weakness. Your survival depends on my protection. We need each other. I don't need you, Isabella said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, you do. Without me, you'd be dead within a week. The people who killed Adrian would come for you next, just to send a message. Marco's gaze was intense, almost hypnotic. I'm the only thing keeping you alive, Isabella. The sooner you accept that, the better. And what do you get out of this, besides a convenient symbol for your revenge? Marco's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear. I get to keep one promise to my brother. He wanted you protected. So I'll protect you, even if you hate me for it. The honesty in his voice caught Isabella off guard. She'd expected cruelty, manipulation, cold strategy, not this raw admission of duty tangled with grief. I don't hate you, she found herself saying. I don't understand you, and I definitely don't trust you, but I don't hate you. That's more than I expected. Marco stepped back, creating distance again. I have work to do. There's a secure phone on your desk if you want to call your family. Supervised, but you can speak to them. Isabella's heart leapt. Really? They're worried about you, and despite what you think, I'm not interested in causing you unnecessary suffering. Marco moved toward the door, then paused. The piano playing was beautiful. You should do it more often. Then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with the echo of music and the complicated mess of feelings she couldn't quite name. She returned to her suite and found the phone Marco had mentioned, a sleek device that looked expensive and probably had recording capabilities. But she didn't care. She needed to hear her sister's voice, needed some connection to the life she'd left behind. Her mother answered on the second ring. Isabella? Oh, thank God, is that really you? It's me, Mama. Isabella's voice cracked. I'm okay. I'm safe. We heard about Adrian, about the wedding. We were so worried. Her mother's voice dissolved into tears. I know, Mama, I know. But I'm all right. The lie tasted bitter. How's Lucia? How's her treatment going? The treatments are going well. The doctors say she's responding better than expected. Her mother sniffled. The Falcone family has been very generous. They've covered everything, even the experimental procedures insurance wouldn't pay for. Blood money, Isabella thought. Payment for delivering a bride to slaughter. Can I talk to her? She's sleeping right now, but she asks about you every day. She misses you terribly. I miss her too. Isabella's throat tightened. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'll see her soon. Another lie. Marco would never let her leave the palazzo for family visits. Too risky. They talked for a few more minutes, her mother filling her in on neighborhood gossip and small details of normal life that felt impossibly distant. When they finally said goodbye, Isabella felt more alone than ever. She spent the evening on her balcony, watching the city lights emerge as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Marco was interrogating the man who'd helped kill Adrian. Somewhere, families were gathering for dinner and talking about ordinary problems. And somewhere, the girl Isabella used to be was still dreaming of finishing her nursing degree and living a simple, quiet life. That girl was dead now, buried alongside Adrian in the Falcone cemetery. What remained was this new person, harder, more cynical, trapped in a world of blood and power. And standing in the shadows of that world was Marco Falcone, the monster who'd appointed himself her keeper. Isabella wondered how long it would take before the darkness consuming him started consuming her too. Isabella woke that night to the sound of screaming. The cry was distant, muffled by stone walls and multiple floors, but unmistakable in its agony. She sat up in the darkness of her bedroom, heart pounding, listening to the terrible sound echo through the palazzo. It went on for several minutes before cutting off abruptly, leaving behind a silence that was somehow worse. She knew what it meant. Marco was interrogating the eighth shooter. Isabella pulled a robe over her nightgown and moved to her door, half expecting to find it locked. But the handle turned easily under her hand. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by wall sconces that cast dancing shadows across marble floors. No guards were visible, though she knew they were there somewhere, watching from the darkness. She shouldn't go looking for the source of those screams. Should return to bed, pull the covers over her head, pretend she hadn't heard anything. But something drove her forward, morbid curiosity, or perhaps a need to fully understand the man who controlled her fate. Isabella moved through the palazzo's corridors, following her instincts toward the east wing that Dante had declared off limits. The screaming had stopped, but she could hear voices now, low and urgent. She descended a staircase she hadn't explored before, the air growing cooler as she went deeper into the building's foundations. At the bottom of the stairs, a heavy door stood slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap, and Isabella heard Marco's voice, cold and precise. "I'll ask you one more time. Who gave the order?" A man's voice, ragged with pain. "I don't know names. We were hired through intermediaries. Not good enough." Marco's tone didn't rise, didn't show any emotion at all. "Dante, the pliers again." Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She should leave, should run back to her suite and forget she'd ever heard this. But her feet stayed rooted to the stone floor, and before she could stop herself, she was pushing the door open wider. The room beyond looked like it had been designed specifically for torture. Stone walls, a drain in the center of the floor, hooks embedded in the ceiling. The eighth shooter was strapped to a metal chair, his face a mask of blood and bruises. Dante stood beside him, holding surgical pliers that gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights. And Marco stood in front of the prisoner, his shirt sleeves rolled up, blood spattering his forearms like macabre paint. He sensed her presence immediately, his head turning toward the door. For a moment, shock registered on his scarred face. Then, anger. "Get her out of here," he snapped at Dante. But Isabella was already backing away, her stomach churning. She'd known intellectually what Marco did, what kind of man he was. But seeing it, witnessing the casual brutality, made it viscerally real in a way that terrified her. She ran. Back through corridors, upstairs, stumbling in her haste to escape what she'd witnessed. By the time she reached her suite, tears were streaming down her face, and she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Isabella made it to the bathroom before she vomited, her body rejecting the reality of what the Falcone Empire truly meant. She knelt on cold marble, emptying her stomach until there was nothing left but dry heaves and the taste of bile. She didn't hear Marco enter her suite, didn't realize he was there until his hand settled gently on her shoulder. Isabella jerked away, scrambling backward until her back hit the bathroom wall. "Don't touch me." Marco stood in the doorway, and he'd cleaned the blood from his arms, but not changed his clothes. The spattered shirt was a brutal reminder of what he'd been doing an hour ago. "You shouldn't have come down there," he said quietly. "You were torturing him." Isabella's voice shook. "I heard him screaming, and you were getting information that will save lives." Marco moved slowly, like approaching a frightened animal. "That man helped murder my brother and 23 innocent people. He knows who ordered the attack, and I need that information." "So you torture him?" "Yes." No apology, no shame. "This is who I am, Isabella. This is what I do. I told you that from the beginning." Telling me and showing me are very different things. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the palazzo's warmth. "I can't be here. I can't be part of this." "You don't have a choice." Marco crouched down to her level, his scarred face inches from hers. "You're already part of this, whether you witnessed it or not. The only difference is now you can't pretend you don't know." "I want to leave. Send me away. Lock me back in that room at the villa. Anything but keeping me here while you—" "While I what? Protect this family? Hunt down our enemies?" Marco's voice hardened. "You think I enjoy this? You think I want to spend my nights extracting information from dying men?" "I think you're good at it. Too good." The accusation hit its mark. Something flickered across Marco's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "I'll have Sophia bring you something to help you sleep," he said, "and I'll make sure you don't hear anything else from the interrogation rooms." "Did he talk? Your prisoner?" Marco paused at the bathroom door. "Yes. Before you arrived, he gave us 3 names. We'll move on them tomorrow." "And then what happens to him?" "He dies." Marco's tone was matter-of-fact. "Quickly, if he's lucky. That's more mercy than he showed the people at Adrian's wedding." Then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with her horror and the inescapable truth that she was trapped in a world where torture and murder were just business as usual. Sophia arrived 20 minutes later with tea laced with something that made Isabella's limbs feel heavy and her thoughts blur. She didn't resist when the girl helped her to bed, didn't protest when Sophia stayed until she fell into dreamless sleep. When Isabella woke, sunlight was streaming through her windows, and Sophia was setting down a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Falcone," the girl said with determined cheerfulness. "I've brought you toast, fruit, and coffee. Mr. Marco said you had a difficult night." Isabella sat up slowly, her head aching. That's one way to describe it. "He also asked me to tell you that the situation from last night has been resolved. You won't be disturbed by it again." Resolved. A sanitized word for murdered. "Sophia," Isabella said carefully, "how do you live with this, knowing what happens in this house?" The girl's cheerful mask slipped slightly. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. "My father was an enforcer for a rival family. When I was 16, that family went to war with the Falcones. My father was killed in the fighting." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was a violent man who hurt my mother regularly." Sophia's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "After he died, the Falcones could have left us to starve. Instead, Mr. Marco offered my mother a job in the kitchens and eventually hired me too. He didn't have to do that. We were enemy family." "So you're loyal because he showed you mercy?" "I'm loyal because he showed me that survival sometimes requires hard choices." Sophia met Isabella's eyes. "Yes, Mr. Marco does terrible things, but he does them to protect the people under his care. Everyone in this household knows that if we serve him faithfully, he'll move heaven and earth to keep us safe." Isabella absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with the man she'd seen torturing a prisoner hours ago. Marco Falcone was becoming increasingly impossible to categorize, monster and protector existing in the same scarred skin. "Did he tell you what I saw last night?" Isabella asked. "He didn't have to. The East Wing is where the unpleasant work happens. Anyone who goes down there knows what they'll find." Sophia stood, smoothing her uniform. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I think Mr. Marco regrets that you witnessed it. He tries to keep that part of his life separate from everything else." After Sophia left, Isabella forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like ash. She was still sitting at the small table in her suite when Marco appeared in her doorway, dressed in a crisp suit that made him look more like a businessman than a torturer. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Marco entered her suite uninvited, moving to stand by her windows. "What you saw last night was necessary. I won't apologize for it." "I didn't ask you to." "But you're horrified, disgusted, probably questioning whether you can survive in this world." Marco turned to face her. "So let me make something very clear. That man, the one you saw in the interrogation room, he fired 17 shots into the wedding crowd. We have him on video executing a 13-year-old girl who was a guest at the reception. He's not some innocent victim. He's a murderer who got caught." Isabella's stomach turned. "A child?" "Senator Romano's granddaughter. She was hiding under a table when he found her and shot her in the head at point-blank range." Marco's voice was ice. "So before you judge me too harshly for extracting information from him, remember what kind of man he is. That doesn't make torture right. Nothing about this world is right, Isabella. It's brutal and ugly and operates by rules that civilized society pretends don't exist." Marco moved closer. "But I'm very good at navigating those rules. And as long as you're under my protection, you'll stay alive because I'm willing to do the things you can't stomach." "I never asked for your protection. Adrian asked for it. In his last words, he told me to protect you, and I intend to honor that request, even if it means you hate me for it." The mention of Adrian created a painful silence between them. Isabella looked away, unable to meet Marco's intense gaze. "The prisoner gave us 3 names before he died," Marco continued. "Carlo Messina, head of the Messina crime family; Giuseppe Carbone, their chief enforcer; and a politician named Senator Vitale, who's been on our payroll for years but apparently decided to switch sides." "You're going to kill them all?" "Yes, but not immediately. First, I need to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. How many families were involved? Who else might turn against us? what they hoped to accomplish by killing Adrian. Marco pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. Which brings me to why I'm here. Tomorrow night there's a charity gala, major political fundraiser with all of the city's power players in attendance. You're coming with me. Isabella's head snapped up. What? No, absolutely not. It wasn't a request. Marco pocketed his phone. Senator Vitale will be there. I need to observe him, see who he talks to, gather intelligence. And I need you beside me, playing the role of grieving widow. I won't be your prop. You'll do exactly what I tell you. Marco's voice turned hard. Because if you don't, I'll lock you back in that room at the villa and you'll never see daylight again. Is that what you want? I want to be free. That's not one of your options. Marco moved to the door, then paused. Wear black. Look beautiful and sad. And for both our sakes, don't try to run or do anything stupid. Understood? Isabella glared at him, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. I hate you. I know. Wear something elegant. We leave at 7. The next day passed in a blur of preparation that Isabella wanted no part of, but couldn't avoid. Sophia appeared with a selection of evening gowns, all black, all devastatingly expensive. A hairstylist arrived to tame Isabella's hair into elegant waves. A makeup artist worked magic to make her look ethereally beautiful while still appropriately grief-stricken. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, Isabella barely recognized herself in the mirror. The black gown hugged her figure perfectly, the fabric some kind of silk that caught the light when she moved. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and the makeup emphasized her eyes while keeping her looking pale and fragile. She looked exactly like what Marco needed her to be, a tragic figure, a symbol of innocent love destroyed. Marco was waiting in the palazzo's entrance hall, wearing a tuxedo that transformed him from brutal enforcer into something dangerously sophisticated. The scar across his face only added to his appeal, a hint of danger beneath the civilized surface. His eyes swept over Isabella, and something flickered in their depths. Appreciation, maybe, or possession. You look perfect, he said. I look like a doll you've dressed up. You look like Adrian's widow, which is exactly what we need. Marco offered his arm. Shall we? The gala was held at one of the city's most prestigious hotels, a glittering affair of champagne and designer gowns and carefully orchestrated networking. Isabella descended from the car on Marco's arm, immediately aware of the attention they drew. Cameras flashed. Apparently the press had been invited, and she heard whispers ripple through the crowd. That's her, the Falcone widow. She married him the night he died. How tragic. And now she's with the brother. How convenient. Marco's hand tightened slightly on her waist, a warning to keep her expression neutral. They moved through the crowd, Marco greeting various politicians and businessmen with easy charm that seemed completely at odds with the man who'd tortured someone to death 2 nights ago. Remember, he murmured in her ear, you're here to be seen. Look sad? Stay close to me and don't speak unless directly addressed. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Having me completely under your control. I'm enjoying keeping you alive, which requires you following my instructions. Marco guided her toward the bar. And for the record, if I wanted you completely under my control, you'd still be locked in that room. A waiter appeared with champagne. Marco took 2 glasses, handing one to Isabella. I don't want to drink, she said. You don't have to drink it, just hold it. It gives your hands something to do and makes you look more comfortable. Isabella accepted the glass, hating that his advice made sense. Around them, the beautiful people of the city's elite mingled and laughed, completely unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, that they were socializing with criminals and murderers. There, Marco said quietly, his gaze fixing on someone across the room. Senator Vitale, the gray-haired man near the string quartet. Isabella followed his line of sight to see a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, surrounded by admirers. He looked like everyone's idealized grandfather, kind eyes, warm smile, the perfect image of benevolent authority. He ordered Adrian's death? Isabella couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. He facilitated it, provided inside information about security, timing, guest lists. Marco's tone was conversational, but Isabella felt the tension coiling through his body. He's been collecting bribes from 3 different crime families for years. We thought he was loyal to us, but apparently the others made him a better offer. How do you know this? The prisoner told me, right before he died. Marco took a sip of champagne. Vitale doesn't know we've identified him yet. So tonight, I watch. I see who he talks to, who he's nervous around, and then I decide how to handle him. By killing him. Eventually. But first I'll use him. Feed him false information, see where it goes. Maybe turn him back into a double agent. Marco's smile was cold. There are fates worse than death, Isabella. Sometimes keeping enemies alive and exploited is more useful than simply eliminating them. Before Isabella could respond, a woman approached them, elegant, probably in her 50s, wearing enough diamonds to fund a small country. Marco Falcone, she said warmly. I was so sorry to hear about Adrian. Such a terrible tragedy. Thank you, Contessa. Marco's demeanor shifted instantly to charming grief. It's been a difficult time for the family. The Contessa's gaze slid to Isabella, assessing. And this must be Adrian's bride. My dear, you poor thing. To lose your husband on your wedding night, I can't even imagine. Isabella felt Marco's hand press warningly against her back. She managed a trembling smile. Thank you for your condolences. It's been overwhelming. I'm sure Marco is taking excellent care of you. The Contessa's tone suggested she suspected exactly what kind of care that might be. The Falcone family has always been so protective of their own. They made small talk for several more minutes before the Contessa moved on to network with other guests. As soon as she was out of earshot, Isabella turned to Marco. She thinks we're sleeping together. Most people do. Marco seemed unbothered by this. A beautiful young widow and the powerful man protecting her. The conclusion is obvious, but it's not true. Does that matter? Marco's gaze was intense. Perception is often more important than reality in this world. If people think you're mine, they're less likely to see you as a target or a potential ally to be turned against me. Isabella's cheeks flushed with anger and something else she didn't want to examine. So you're using me as a shield and letting people think I'm your mistress. How chivalrous. I never claimed to be chivalrous. Marco's hand slid from her back to her waist, pulling her slightly closer. I claimed to be effective. There's a difference. For the next hour, Isabella played her role perfectly. The beautiful, tragic widow clinging to her protector's arm. She smiled sadly, accepted condolences gracefully, and watched as Marco worked the room with practiced efficiency. He was good at this, she realized. The social manipulation, the careful conversations that gathered intelligence while revealing nothing. But she also noticed the way his eyes constantly scanned the crowd, cataloging threats and opportunities. The way his body positioned itself between her and potential danger. The way his hand never left her waist, as if anchoring her to his side. He wasn't just using her as a prop, he was genuinely protecting her. The realization was unsettling. Midway through the evening, Senator Vitale approached them. Up close, his grandfatherly charm was even more convincing. Twinkling eyes, genuine-seeming warmth in his handshake as he gripped Marco's hand. Marco, my boy, how are you holding up? As well as can be expected, Senator. Marco's tone was respectful, deferential even. It means a great deal that you're here. Adrian was a good man. His loss is felt deeply throughout the community. Vitale turned to Isabella, taking her hand and pressing it between both of his. And you, dear child, to endure such tragedy so young. My heart breaks for you. Isabella felt bile rise in her throat. This man, this monster hiding behind a kind face, had helped orchestrate the massacre that killed Adrian. And here he stood, offering sympathy like it was genuine. Thank you, Senator, she managed, her voice barely steady. If there's anything I can do, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Vitale's grip on her hand tightened slightly. The Falcone family has always had my support, and that extends especially to you in this difficult time. Your support means everything, Marco said smoothly. In fact, I was hoping we could meet soon. There are some political matters I'd like to discuss, some opportunities that might interest you. Vitale's eyes sharpened with interest. Of course. Have your assistant call my office. We'll arrange lunch. After Vitale moved on, Isabella pulled her hand from Marco's grip and fought the urge to scrub it clean. He touched me. That murderer put his hands on me and pretended to care. Breathe, Marco murmured. You did well, better than I expected. I want to leave. Now. We can't leave yet. It would look suspicious. Marco guided her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. But we can take a break. There's a terrace through those doors. Get some air. The terrace overlooked the city, lights spreading out like fallen stars. Isabella gulped in cool night air, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. Marco stood beside her, silent for once. Finally, he spoke. You handled that perfectly. Vitale suspects nothing. He's going to die, isn't he? You're going to kill him. Yes, but not until I've extracted every useful piece of information from him first. Marco lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his scarred face. He betrayed my family, helped murder my brother. He'll pay for that, but first he'll serve a purpose. Everything is strategic with you. Everyone is just a piece to be moved on some invisible chessboard. That's what keeps people alive, Isabella. Strategy, planning, thinking 3 moves ahead. Marco exhaled smoke into the darkness. The moment I start making emotional decisions is the moment this entire empire collapses. Is that what I am? A strategic piece? Marco was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprising her, you're the one variable I can't quite calculate. I know what you should be. A symbol, a tool, a means to an end. But you keep refusing to fit into that category. Because I'm a person, not a game piece. I know that. Marco's voice was rough. Trust me, I'm painfully aware. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, shouting erupted from inside the ballroom. Then gunfire. Marco moved with terrifying speed, shoving Isabella behind a stone pillar as bullets shattered the terrace doors. Glass exploded inward, and Isabella heard screaming from the ballroom, chaos and panic, and death happening all over again. Stay down, Marco ordered, his gun already drawn. Don't move until I come back for you. Marco, wait! But he was already gone, charging into the ballroom toward the danger instead of away from it. Isabella pressed herself against the pillar, her heart hammering, listening to more gunfire and screaming. This couldn't be happening again. Not another massacre, not more death. Through the shattered doors, she could see bodies on the floor, guests scrambling for exits, men in tactical gear firing methodically into the crowd. And in the center of it all was Marco, moving like death incarnate, his gun barking as he took down attackers with brutal precision. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, a predator in his element, completely unafraid of the violence surrounding him. Isabella watched him drop 3 men in rapid succession, watched him grab a wounded woman and shove her toward safety without breaking stride. Then she saw Senator Vitale. The distinguished politician was using the chaos to slip toward a side exit, his expression no longer grandfatherly, but coldly calculating. He had a phone pressed to his ear, and even from this distance, Isabella could see the satisfaction on his face. He'd orchestrated this. Another attack, using the gala as cover. Without thinking, Isabella left her hiding place and ran after him. Mrs. Falcone, no! Someone, maybe Dante, shouted behind her, but she ignored it. She couldn't let Vitale escape, couldn't let him disappear into the night after orchestrating more death. Vitale was fast for his age, already through the side door and into a service corridor. Isabella chased him, her heels clicking on polished floors, her elegant gown hampering her movement. She kicked off her shoes and ran faster, closing the distance. Stop! She shouted. Vitale glanced back, surprise flashing across his face. Then he pulled a gun from inside his jacket, small, deadly, pointed directly at her heart. Stupid girl, he said. You should have stayed hidden. Isabella froze, suddenly aware of how reckless she'd been. She was unarmed, untrained, facing down a man who'd helped orchestrate multiple murders. Her hands rose instinctively in surrender. Marco knows, she said desperately. He knows you're the traitor. Killing me won't help you. No, but it'll hurt him. And right now, that's good enough. Vitale's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed corridor. But it wasn't Vitale's gun that fired. The senator collapsed, a red bloom spreading across his chest. Behind him stood Marco, his gun still raised, his scarred face absolutely cold. I told you to stay down, he said to Isabella. Then the world tilted sideways, adrenaline leaving Isabella's system in a rush. She felt herself falling, felt strong arms catch her before she hit the ground. I've got you, Marco's voice murmured against her hair. You're safe. I've got you. Isabella clung to him, trembling, as the sounds of chaos faded behind them. She'd almost died. Would have died if Marco hadn't followed her, if he hadn't taken that shot. "Why did you run after him?" Marco demanded, and now there was anger beneath the concern. "You could have been killed." He was escaping. He orchestrated this, and he was just going to walk away. "So you decided to chase down an armed criminal with no weapon and no backup?" Marco's arms tightened around her. "That was the stupidest, most reckless—" "I wasn't thinking clearly." "Obviously." Marco pulled back enough to look at her face, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, just scared." "Good. You should be scared, because if anything had happened to you—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "Don't ever do that again." Behind them, Dante appeared with several other Falcone men. They took in the scene, Vitale's body, Isabella in Marco's arms, and Dante's expression showed grudging respect. "Mrs. Falcone cornered him," he observed. "Mrs. Falcone nearly got herself killed," Marco corrected harshly. But his hands were gentle as he helped Isabella to her feet. "Get her back to the palazzo. I need to clean up this mess." "You're not coming?" Isabella asked. "I have a ballroom full of witnesses and another attempted massacre to explain. This is going to take hours." Marco's thumb brushed across her cheek, a gesture so unexpected that Isabella's breath caught. "Go home. Rest. We'll talk tomorrow." Then he was striding back toward the chaos, leaving Isabella with Dante and the body of the man who tried to destroy them all. The drive back to the palazzo was silent. Isabella stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, trying to process what had just happened. She'd chased down a traitor, had nearly been killed, had been saved by the monster she was supposed to fear. And when Marco had held her, when he'd checked her for injuries with those careful hands, she'd felt safe. That realization terrified her more than any of the violence she'd witnessed, because somewhere in the darkness and blood and impossible circumstances, Isabella was starting to see Marco Falcone as something more than her captor, and that was the most dangerous development of all. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She paced her suite until dawn, replaying the moment Vitale's gun had pointed at her heart, the deafening crack of Marco's shot, the weight of his arms catching her before she fell. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the senator's body crumpling to the floor, saw the cold certainty in Marco's face as he'd pulled the trigger. He'd killed a man to save her life. The thought circled endlessly through her mind, refusing to settle into any coherent understanding. Marco Falcone was a monster who tortured prisoners and orchestrated murders without hesitation. But he was also the man who'd thrown himself into danger to protect her, who'd held her with unexpected gentleness, whose voice had cracked with genuine fear when he'd demanded why she'd chased after Vitale. Sofia found her on the balcony as sunrise painted the city in shades of gold and pink, still wearing the torn evening gown from the gala. "Mrs. Falcone," the girl said softly, "you should rest. You've been through so much." "I can't rest." Isabella's voice was hoarse from disuse. "Every time I try, I see it happening again." Sofia moved to stand beside her, her presence quietly comforting. "Mr. Marco hasn't returned yet. They're saying the gala attack was worse than the wedding. 15 dead, dozens wounded. 15 more bodies. 15 more lives ended because of the endless war that defined the Falcone Empire." Isabella's hands gripped the balcony railing hard enough to hurt. "The news is calling you a hero," Sofia continued. "Someone leaked footage of you chasing Senator Vitale. They're saying you exposed the traitor who'd been orchestrating the attacks." "I'm not a hero. I was stupid and reckless and nearly got myself killed." "But you didn't get killed, mister. Marco made sure of that." Sofia's tone was gentle. "He always does." Isabella turned to look at the girl. "You really believe in him, don't you? Despite everything he is, everything he does." "I believe he's the reason my mother and I are alive, that we have food, shelter, safety." Sofia met her gaze steadily. "The world Mr. Marco operates in doesn't allow for weakness or mercy. But within the protection he offers, there's more kindness than you'd expect." Before Isabella could respond, her suite door opened and Marco appeared. He looked exhausted, his tuxedo jacket gone, his white shirt stained with blood and dirt. The scar across his face seemed more pronounced in the morning light, a testament to past violence survived. "Leave us," he said to Sofia. The girl departed quickly, and Isabella was left alone with the man who'd saved her life hours ago. They stared at each other across the elegant room, and Isabella felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her chest. "You should have stayed hidden," Marco said finally, his voice rough with fatigue and suppressed emotion. "You should have trusted me to handle Vitale. He was escaping. I couldn't just let him, so instead you nearly died." Marco moved closer, and Isabella saw the fury barely contained beneath his exhaustion. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if I'd been 3 seconds slower, if my shot hadn't been clean? You would have found another widow to use as your symbol." The words were cruel, meant to hurt, and they hit their target perfectly. Marco's expression shuddered, and for a moment Isabella thought he might leave. Instead, he closed the distance between them in 3 swift strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Is that what you think?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "That you're just interchangeable? Just a convenient prop? Isn't that what you've told me from the beginning? What I've told you and what's true are becoming very different things." Marco's grip tightened, not painfully, but desperately, like he was trying to anchor himself. "When I saw Vitale's gun pointed at you, when I thought I might be too late..." He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard Isabella could see the muscle jump beneath his scarred skin. "What?" she pressed. "What did you feel?" "Terror." The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. Pure, absolute terror that I was going to fail you the same way I failed Adrian. That I'd have to watch another person I was supposed to protect die right in front of me. Isabella's breath caught. "Marco, I can't lose you." His hand slid from her shoulders to frame her face, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. "I know I have no right to feel that way. I know you're here because you have no choice, that you hate me for keeping you trapped. But the truth is, Isabella, you stopped being just a symbol weeks ago." "Then what am I?" Marco's thumb traced her cheekbone, the gesture achingly gentle from a man capable of such violence. "You're the one variable I can't control, the one person who sees exactly what I am and hasn't broken. You're brave and reckless, and you play Chopin like you're trying to fill some emptiness inside yourself." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You're everything I have no right to want." The confession hung between them, dangerous and electric. Isabella should pull away, should maintain the distance that kept her safe from the complicated tangle of emotions Marco represented. But his hands were warm against her skin, and his eyes held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "This is insane," she whispered. "You killed my husband's murderers. You torture people. You've built your entire life on violence and control." "I know exactly what I am." Marco's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "And I know I have nothing to offer you except more danger and darkness. But when I thought I might lose you tonight, I realized something." "What?" "That I'd burn the entire city down before I let anyone hurt you again." Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. She should be terrified of the possessive intensity in his words, should recognize it for the dangerous obsession it was. But instead, she felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen since Adrian's death finally beginning to thaw. "I don't trust you," she said, even as her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beating as frantically as her own. "I know. And I haven't forgiven you for keeping me prisoner. I know that too. But when Vitale pointed that gun at me, the only thing I could think was that I didn't want to die before I understood you, before I figured out who you really are beneath all the armor and violence." Marco's laugh was bitter. "I'm exactly what you see, Isabella. There's no hidden goodness waiting to be uncovered, no secret heart of gold beneath the monster." "I don't believe that." Isabella's fingers curled into his blood-stained shirt. "Monsters don't keep their promises to dying brothers. They don't make sure prisoners are fed and comfortable even while keeping them captive. They don't look devastated when they think they've failed to protect someone. You're seeing what you want to see. Maybe. Or maybe I'm seeing what you're too afraid to acknowledge." Isabella tilted her head back to meet his eyes fully. "You're not your father, Marco. You're not just the Empire's enforcer. You're a man who's been forced into an impossible role and convinced himself he has to be a monster to survive it." For a long moment, Marco didn't move, didn't speak. Then, with a sound that might have been surrender or defeat, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. Nothing about Marco was gentle. His mouth claimed hers with desperate intensity, like he was trying to prove something. To her or himself, Isabella couldn't tell. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Isabella felt herself responding despite every rational thought screaming that this was wrong. She was kissing the man who'd kept her prisoner, the man who'd taken over her life and controlled her every movement, the man who'd killed without hesitation to protect his empire. But she was also kissing the man who'd saved her life, who'd promised his dying brother he'd keep her safe, who looked at her like she was both his salvation and his damnation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco's hands were shaking against her face. "This can't happen," he said, but he didn't let her go. "You're Adrian's widow. You're under my protection. I have no right." "Since when do you care about rights?" Isabella's voice was unsteady. "You've taken everything else you wanted. Why stop now?" "Because you're different." Marco's thumb brushed across her kiss-swollen lips. "Because if I let myself have you, I won't be able to let you go, and you deserve better than being possessed by someone like me." "What if I don't want better?" The words escaped before Isabella could stop them, and she saw shock flash across Marco's face. "What if I'm tired of fighting this? Of pretending I don't feel something when you look at me like you're drowning and I'm air? You don't know what you're saying, don't I?" Isabella's hand slid up to frame his scarred face, feeling the rough texture of damaged skin beneath her palms. "I've spent weeks trapped in your world, Marco. Weeks watching you be brutal and tender in equal measure. And somewhere in all that darkness, I started seeing you instead of just the monster." Marco closed his eyes, and Isabella saw something like pain flicker across his features. "If we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be mine completely, and I don't know how to love someone without destroying them." "Then don't love me." Isabella pulled him closer, reckless with emotions she didn't fully understand. "Just don't let me go." The kiss this time was different, slower, deeper, loaded with promises neither of them should make. Marco's hands moved down her body, finding the zipper of her ruined gown, and Isabella felt the fabric loosen and slide away. She should stop this. Should maintain some boundary between captor and captive. But his touch felt like coming alive after weeks of numbness, and she couldn't bring herself to pull away. They made it as far as her bedroom before rational thought completely abandoned them both. Marco's shirt joined her gown on the floor, and Isabella traced the scars that decorated his torso, evidence of a life lived in violence. Each mark told a story of survival, of battles fought and barely won. "These are from the night you got the scar on your face," she said, her fingers trailing over a particularly vicious mark across his ribs. "Rival family ambush. I was 19. Marco's voice was rough. "My father sent Adrian away to safety and left me to fight our way out. He used you. He prepared me for what I'd become." Marco caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. "Stop trying to make me into a victim, Isabella. I chose this life." "Did you? Or did you just never get the chance to choose anything else?" Marco didn't answer. Instead, he kissed her again, and they fell together onto silk sheets that smelled of lavender and expensive detergent. His hands mapped her body with careful intensity, like he was memorizing every curve and hollow. And when they finally came together, it felt less like surrender and more like inevitability, two damaged people finding temporary refuge in each other's arms. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dawn light, and Isabella felt the weight of what they'd just done settle over her like a shroud. She'd slept with Marco Falcone, her dead husband's brother, her captor, the man who'd systematically destroyed everyone responsible for Adrian's murder. "I can hear you thinking," Marco murmured against her hair. "I'm trying to figure out if I've lost my mind." "Probably." His arm tightened around her waist. "But if it helps, I think I lost mine weeks ago." "When?" Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, "The wedding. When I saw you standing beside Adrian, looking so beautiful and terrified, I told myself I hated you for making him weak. But the truth was, I envied him, envied that he got to have you when I knew I never could." Isabella turned in his arms to face him. "You wanted me even then?" "I wanted you before then." Marco's confession was raw, honest. "Your family started negotiating the marriage 6 months before the wedding. I saw you once during those negotiations. You were visiting your sister in the hospital, and I was there meeting with one of our associates. You smiled at a child in the waiting room and made him laugh even though he was clearly in pain, and I thought—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "What did you think?" "That Adrian didn't deserve you. That someone so genuinely kind had no place in our world." Marco's scarred hand cupped her face. "And that if you were mine, I'd lock you away somewhere safe where the ugliness of what I do could never touch you." "That's exactly what you did. Locked me away. To protect you. And to keep me for yourself." Isabella saw the truth flicker across his face. "You can't control everything, Marco. You can't keep me in a cage and pretend it's for my own good." "Then what do you want?" His voice was strained. "You want freedom? I'll arrange for you to leave the country, set you up somewhere safe with enough money to live comfortably. You want revenge against me for keeping you prisoner? I'll hand you a loaded gun and let you take your shot. Just tell me what you want, Isabella, because I can't figure it out." Isabella thought about what she wanted, really wanted, beneath the anger and fear and complicated desire. And the answer surprised her. "I want to stop feeling helpless," she said finally. "I want to understand this world instead of just being a victim of it. I want to know who ordered Adrian's death and why. I want to be more than just a symbol or a protected widow." Marco studied her face, searching for something. "You want agency?" "Yes. I want to make my own choices, even if they're dangerous ones." Isabella held his gaze. "And I want the truth. All of it. No more keeping me in the dark while you make decisions about my life. The truth is ugly. I've already seen ugly. I watched my husband die. I've witnessed torture and murder. I've been kept prisoner and paraded around like a trophy. I think I can handle whatever truth you're hiding." Marco's expression warred between protectiveness and respect for what she was asking. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "All right, you want the truth? Then I'll give it to you. But once you know, you can't unknow it. And you might wish I'd kept you in the dark." He rose from the bed, pulling on his discarded pants before retrieving a folder from the jacket he'd thrown over a chair. When he returned, his face was serious in a way that made Isabella's stomach clench with anticipation. "What's that?" she asked. "The full investigation into Adrian's murder." Marco sat on the edge of the bed, the folder heavy in his hands. "Everything we've learned over the past few weeks. Names, connections, motivations, all of it." Isabella pulled the sheet around herself and sat up. "Show me." Marco opened the folder, spreading documents across the bed between them. Photographs, financial records, surveillance images, transcripts of interrogations. The bureaucracy of revenge laid out in neat columns and annotated notes. "The attack was orchestrated by a coalition of 3 families," Marco began, his voice falling into the clinical tone of someone reporting facts. "The Messinas, the Santoros, and the De Lucas. They've been watching our family's operations for years, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Why target Adrian specifically? Because he was trying to legitimize the family, pull us out of the criminal underworld and into legal business ventures." Marco pulled out a document covered in financial projections. Adrian had been quietly buying up legitimate companies, investing in real estate, creating revenue streams that didn't rely on illegal activities. Within 5 years, he could have transformed the Falcone empire into something almost respectable. And the other families didn't want that. They saw it as weakness, as betrayal of the old ways. Marco's finger traced a line connecting various photographs. But more than that, they were afraid. If we went legitimate, we'd have access to political and legal power they couldn't touch. We'd be untouchable. Isabella studied the documents, seeing the pattern emerge. So they killed him to prevent that transformation. They killed him to send a message that no one leaves this world, that attempting to change is the same as signing your own death warrant. Marco pulled out another photograph, Adrian's body on the ballroom floor, the image so stark that Isabella had to look away. And they used his wedding to do it, made it as public and brutal as possible, to terrorize anyone else who might try to follow his example. Exactly. Marco gathered the photographs, his movements careful, almost reverent. The wedding attack wasn't just about eliminating Adrian. It was about destroying hope, proving that there's no escape from what we are. Isabella felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Have you killed them all? The people responsible?" "Most of them. The Messina family is completely eliminated. Every member, every associate, every business they controlled. The Santoros negotiated surrender, and I let the women and children live in exchange for total capitulation. The De Lucas are still fighting, but they're down to a handful of soldiers and no leadership. Marco's voice was emotionless, reciting facts. Within a month, maybe two, there won't be anyone left who had a hand in Adrian's death. And then what? You just go back to running the empire the way it's always been run? That's the plan. So Adrian died for nothing. The words tasted bitter. His dream of transforming the family dies with him, and everything goes back to the way it was. Marco's hand stilled on the documents. What are you suggesting? That maybe he was right. Maybe there is a way out of this cycle of violence. Isabella leaned forward, urgency building in her chest. You have the power now, Marco. Complete control of the family. You could continue what Adrian started. I'm not Adrian. No, you're not. You're stronger, more ruthless, better equipped to handle opposition. Isabella grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. Adrian was too gentle for this world. But you? You could force the transformation, make the other families understand that the Falcone Empire is changing whether they like it or not. That would require me to become something I'm not. Would it? Or would it just require you to use your skills differently? Isabella pulled one of the financial documents toward her. You're brilliant at strategy, at reading people, at making hard decisions. Use those skills to build something instead of just destroying things. Marco stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. You're talking about legitimizing a criminal empire. It's not that simple. Nothing worth doing is simple. Isabella felt conviction building, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Adrian's death. But think about it, really think about it. How many people work for the Falcone family? How many depend on you for their livelihood? Hundreds. If you count all the businesses and subsidiaries, thousands. And how many of them actually want to be criminals? How many are just doing what they have to do to survive? Isabella saw the flicker of understanding in Marco's eyes. You could give them a way out. Transform the empire into something legitimate, and everyone who serves you gets a chance at a different life. The other families would never allow it. Then you make them irrelevant. You become so powerful in the legitimate world that they can't touch you. Isabella's voice grew stronger. Adrian had the vision, but not the strength to implement it. You have the strength, but never saw the vision. Together, she stopped, realizing what she'd just implied. Marco's eyes narrowed. Together? I want to help. The decision crystallized as she spoke. I want to be part of this. Not just a symbol or a protected widow, but an actual partner in transforming what the Falcone family becomes. You have no experience with... I have a degree in business administration that I never got to finish because my family couldn't afford it. I spent 2 years working as a nurse's assistant, which taught me how to manage chaos and make life or death decisions under pressure. And I've spent the last month watching you operate, learning how this world works. Isabella held his gaze steadily. I'm not asking to run the empire, Marco. I'm asking to help build something better from the ruins. Marco stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Dawn had fully broken, painting the city in shades of gold that made everything look deceptively peaceful. Isabella watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his scarred hand kept clenching and releasing. You don't understand what you're asking, he said finally. The transformation Adrian wanted would take years, maybe decades. And every step of the way, we'd face opposition from families who want to maintain the status quo. People would die, including possibly you. People are already dying, Marco. The question is whether they're dying for something that matters. He turned to face her, and Isabella saw genuine conflict in his expression. If we do this, if we actually try to honor Adrian's vision, I can't protect you the way I have been. You'd need to be visible, active, involved in ways that put you directly in danger. I chased down a traitor with no weapon last night. I think I've already accepted that danger is part of my life now. This would be different. This would be choosing danger instead of stumbling into it. Marco moved back to the bed, sitting close enough that their knees touched. And if something happened to you because I let you take this risk, then it would be my choice. My risk, not your failure. Isabella covered his hand with hers. Stop trying to protect me from everything, Marco. Let me stand beside you instead of behind you. For a long moment, Marco studied her face, searching for something. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, you want to be part of this? Then you need to understand exactly what you're signing up for. He spent the next hour walking her through the reality of the Falcone empire, the legitimate businesses Adrian had already acquired, the money laundering operations that would need to be dismantled, the political connections that could be leveraged, the rival families that would resist. He was brutally honest about the challenges, the timeline, the very real possibility of failure. And with every word, Isabella felt her resolve strengthen. This was what she'd been searching for without realizing it: purpose beyond survival, agency beyond choosing which cage to live in. A way to make Adrian's death mean something while building a future that didn't revolve around endless violence. There's one more thing you need to know, Marco said as the morning sun climbed higher. If we do this, if we try to transform the family, you and I can't be what we were a few hours ago. Isabella's heart clenched. What do you mean? I mean, we can't be lovers sneaking around in the dark. If you're going to be my partner in this, it has to be official, public, unambiguous. Marco's gaze was intense, which means dealing with the fact that you're Adrian's widow and I'm his brother. The optics are already terrible, but if we legitimize our relationship, it sends a message about the family's future direction. You're talking about marriage. Eventually, not immediately, that would be disrespectful to Adrian's memory, but within a year, maybe two. Marco's hand cupped her face. I'm talking about building something real between us. Not just convenience or strategy or mutual need, but an actual partnership. Isabella's mind reeled. She'd entered this conversation hoping for agency and purpose. Now Marco was offering her everything: power, partnership, a genuine relationship built on more than just captivity and circumstance. You're asking me to choose you, she said slowly. Not just accept being kept by you, but actively choose to build a life with you. Yes, and I'm giving you the option to say no, to take the money and protection I offered earlier and disappear into a new life somewhere safe. Marco's voice was steady, but Isabella could see the fear beneath. But if you say yes, Isabella, understand that I'm a jealous, possessive man who won't share you with anyone. You'd be mine completely, and I'd be yours in return. Isabella thought about the girl she'd been a month ago, young, naive, dreaming of a quiet life filled with simple joys. That girl was gone, buried alongside Adrian in the Falcone cemetery. What remained was someone harder, more complicated, capable of looking at a brutal killer and seeing potential for transformation. I need time, she said finally, to think about what this really means, to mourn Adrian properly without guilt or confusion, to figure out if what I feel for you is real or just Stockholm Syndrome and survival instinct. Marco nodded slowly. How much time? I don't know. Weeks? Maybe months? Isabella touched his scarred face gently. But during that time, I want to start working, learning the businesses, understanding the operations, proving to you and everyone else that I'm serious about this transformation. You want to earn your place. I want to deserve it. There's a difference. Isabella pulled the sheet more tightly around herself, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. And we should probably put some boundaries in place. What happened between us this morning, it can't happen again. Not until I've made a real decision about what I want. She saw the flash of pain across Marco's face before he masked it. You're right. I took advantage of the situation, of your confusion after the attack. We took advantage of each other, Isabella corrected. And it was a mistake to let things get physical before figuring out what we actually are to each other. Marco stood, gathering his scattered clothes with careful precision. I'll have Dante set you up with access to the business files, and I'll arrange for you to meet with our accountants, lawyers, the people who handle day-to-day operations. You can start learning the legitimate side of things. Thank you. He paused at her bedroom door, half-dressed, looking more vulnerable than Isabella had ever seen him. For what it's worth, Isabella, I meant what I said earlier. You're not just a symbol to me. Haven't been for a long time. I know, but meaning it and building something real from it are very different things. After Marco left, Isabella sat alone in the rumpled sheets, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. She'd survived another attack, had killed a man, or at least exposed him to be killed, had slept with her captor, had committed to transforming a criminal empire. Any one of those things should have broken her. But instead, she felt strangely focused, like she'd finally found solid ground after weeks of drowning. Her phone rang, the secure line Marco had given her for family calls. Isabella answered to find her sister Lucia's voice, weak but happy. "Bella, Mama told me you called. I've missed you so much." Tears pricked Isabella's eyes. "I've missed you too, Luce. How are you feeling?" "Better. The new treatments are working. The doctors say if this keeps up, I might be in remission within 6 months." Lucia's voice dropped. "I heard about what happened at the gala. Are you okay?" "I'm alive. That's more than some people can say." "Bella, you sound different, harder." Isabella looked at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, mussed hair, kiss-bruised lips, eyes that had seen too much. "I am different, Luce. Everything that's happened has changed me." "Are they treating you well? The Falcone family?" Isabella thought about how to answer that. Marco had kept her prisoner, controlled her movements, used her as a strategic tool, but he'd also protected her, saved her life multiple times, and offered her a genuine partnership in building something meaningful. "It's complicated," she said finally, "but I'm making the best of it, and I'm working on something that I think will help a lot of people." "You always did want to save everyone," Lucia said fondly. "Just make sure you save yourself too, okay?" After they hung up, Isabella showered away the physical evidence of the morning's choices and dressed in simple black pants and a silk blouse. She found Marco's folder of documents still scattered across her bed and spent the next hour reading through every page, memorizing names and connections and financial structures. If she was going to do this, truly commit to transforming the Falcone empire, then she needed to understand every aspect of it. The legitimate businesses and the criminal operations, the political connections and the rival families, the money flowing in and the blood being spilled to protect it. By the time Dante knocked on her door that afternoon, Isabella had filled an entire notebook with questions and observations. "Mrs. Falcone," Dante said respectfully. "Mr. Marco asked me to escort you to the business offices. Are you ready?" Isabella grabbed her notebook and stood. "I'm ready." The Falcone business offices occupied the entire third floor of the palazzo, a maze of rooms filled with computers, filing cabinets, and people working with focused efficiency. They looked up when Isabella entered, curiosity and caution in their expressions. Marco was waiting in a conference room along with 3 men and 2 women who radiated professional competence. "Isabella," he greeted formally, all traces of the vulnerable man from this morning hidden behind executive composure. "These are the people who handle our legitimate operations. I've asked them to brief you on current projects and upcoming initiatives." For the next 3 hours, Isabella absorbed information like a sponge. She learned about the real estate holdings, the import-export companies, the restaurant chains and construction firms that formed the skeleton of legitimate business Adrian had been building. She asked sharp questions that made the executives exchange surprised glances, and she took meticulous notes about every weak point and opportunity she identified. Marco watched from the corner of the room, his expression unreadable. But Isabella caught him looking at her with something that might have been pride. By the time the meeting ended, Isabella's head was spinning with information, but she also felt energized in a way she hadn't since before the wedding. This was real. This was tangible. This was something she could actually do. "You impressed them," Marco said after everyone else had left. "They didn't expect you to understand basic business principles, let alone ask about market positioning and competitive advantages." "I told you I had business training." "You told me. I just didn't realize how competent you actually are." Marco moved closer, but carefully, respecting the boundaries she'd set that morning. "This could work, Isabella. You helping to transform the family. I think you might actually be able to pull it off." "We might be able to pull it off," Isabella corrected. "This isn't just me, it's both of us, working together." "Partners." "Partners," Isabella agreed. "In business, at least. The rest we can figure out later." Marco's smile was small but genuine. "Later sounds good. I can wait." As Isabella left the conference room and headed back to her suite, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not the fragile, naive hope she'd brought to her wedding, but something stronger. Hope built on hard truths and clear-eyed acceptance of what the world actually was. She'd entered the Falcone Empire as a sacrificial bride. She'd become a widow, then a prisoner, then something she couldn't quite define. But now, finally, she was becoming something she'd chosen for herself. And that made all the difference. 3 months passed, like the turning of pages in a book Isabella was writing herself for the first time in her life. The palazzo transformed from prison to workplace, its corridors becoming familiar territory as she moved between business meetings, strategy sessions, and late-night planning with Marco that stayed carefully professional despite the tension crackling between them. She learned the empire's architecture from foundation to roof, every legitimate business Adrian had quietly acquired, every shell company that needed dismantling, every political connection that could be leveraged toward respectability. The accountant stopped looking surprised when she caught discrepancies in the books. The lawyers began seeking her input on contract negotiations. And the other family members, initially skeptical of Adrian's widow playing at business, gradually accepted her presence with grudging respect. Marco kept his distance emotionally, honoring the boundaries she'd set, but his eyes followed her constantly. Isabella felt the weight of his attention during board meetings, noticed how he positioned himself between her and potential threats at social functions, caught the way his jaw tightened when other men spoke to her with too much familiarity. He was waiting, she realized, giving her the time and space she'd asked for while making it abundantly clear that his feelings hadn't changed. Her own feelings remained a tangled mesh she couldn't quite sort through. Sometimes she looked at Marco and saw the monster who'd tortured prisoners and orchestrated murders. Other times she saw the man who'd held her gently after saving her life, who listened intently to her business strategies, who smiled with genuine warmth when she successfully negotiated their first major legitimate acquisition. The De Lucas family finally fell in early December, their last stronghold raided by Marco's forces in a brutal operation that left no survivors among the leadership. Isabella had learned not to ask about the details of such operations, accepting that this part of Marco's life existed separate from their business partnership. But she noticed the blood on his clothes when he returned to the palazzo that night, noticed the emptiness in his eyes that suggested he'd done things that haunted him even as he deemed them necessary. "It's done," he said, finding her in the library where she'd been reviewing acquisition proposals. "Everyone responsible for Adrian's death is dead. The families that orchestrated the attack don't exist anymore." Isabella set down her documents. "How do you feel?" "Empty, satisfied, guilty." Marco poured himself whiskey from the library's bar. "Adrian used to say that revenge doesn't actually heal anything, that it just creates new wounds. I'm starting to understand what he meant." "But you'd do it again. Every single time." Marco's eyes met hers. "They killed my brother. They tried to kill you. I'd burn the world down for that." The intensity in his voice made Isabella's breath catch. She stood, moving closer to where he stood by the window. 3 months of carefully maintained distance, and still the air between them felt electric. "Marco," she began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said quietly. "I told you I'd wait. I meant it." What if I never decide? What if I can't sort through everything I feel about you?" "Then we keep working together. Keep building what Adrian started, and I'll accept whatever you're willing to give me." Marco's scarred hand reached out, hovering near her face but not quite touching. "But I need you to know something, Isabella. These past 3 months, watching you transform from frightened widow into a force that terrifies our competitors, it's been the most remarkable thing I've ever witnessed, and it's made me certain that what I feel for you isn't just obsession or convenience. It's real." Before Isabella could respond, Dante appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Boss, we have a situation. The Caruso family just requested an emergency meeting. They're claiming neutral ground at the old cathedral downtown." Marco's entire demeanor shifted to predator alertness. "The Carusos have stayed neutral through this whole war. Why reach out now?" "They wouldn't say over the phone, but they specified that Mrs. Falcone should attend as well." Isabella felt Marco tense beside her. "Absolutely not. It could be a trap. Or it could be an opportunity," Isabella countered. "The Carusos control the southern shipping routes. If we could bring them into partnership on our legitimate operations, I'm not risking your life for a business deal." It's my risk to take. Isabella met his gaze steadily. You said you'd let me stand beside you instead of behind you. Prove it. The muscle in Marco's jaw jumped, and Isabella could see him warring with protective instinct and respect for her agency. Finally, he turned to Dante. Full security detail. I want 50 men positioned around the cathedral before we arrive. Snipers on the surrounding buildings. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, we abort immediately. Understood. 2 hours later, Isabella found herself in the back of an armored car, wearing body armor hidden beneath an elegant black coat. Marco sat beside her, his hand resting on the gun at his hip, his expression grim. This is a mistake, he muttered. You've said that 5 times already. Because it's true 5 times over. Marco's gaze was intense. Isabella, if something happens, then you'll handle it, like you always do. She covered his hand with hers, a gesture that had become familiar over the past months. Trust me to know what I'm doing. I do trust you. It's everyone else I don't trust. The cathedral was old Gothic architecture, all stone arches and stained glass that glowed in the evening darkness. Marco's men had secured the perimeter, their presence obvious enough to discourage betrayal, but discreet enough to avoid outright hostility. Inside, the Caruso family waited. Don Caruso was in his 70s, a relic of the old ways with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Beside him stood his daughter, Valentina, a woman in her 40s who ran the family's legitimate operations with ruthless efficiency. And flanking them were half a dozen soldiers, all armed but with weapons holstered in a show of peaceful intent. Marco Falcone, Don Caruso greeted, his voice carrying through the empty cathedral. And the famous widow, thank you for coming. You requested neutrality, Marco replied, his hand never leaving his weapon. I'm honoring that. For now. Wise. Don Caruso gestured to the pews. Please sit. What I have to say requires time. They sat carefully, Isabella beside Marco, hyper-aware of the armed men positioned throughout the cathedral. This could go wrong so quickly, could turn from negotiation to bloodbath in seconds. I've been watching your war these past months, Don Caruso began. Watched you systematically destroy 3 established families. Watched you absorb their territories, their businesses, their power. Most impressive. Get to the point, Marco said flatly. The point is that you've created a vacuum. The old families are terrified of you now. They see what happened to the Messinas, the Santoros, the De Lucas, and they know their own destruction is just one misstep away. Don Caruso's gaze shifted to Isabella. But then we hear rumors that you're not content with simply being the most feared crime family, that you're attempting what your brother tried, legitimization. Our business ventures are none of your concern, Isabella said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. On the contrary, they're very much my concern. Valentina spoke for the first time, her tone businesslike. If the Falcone Empire goes legitimate, it shifts the entire power structure. You'll have legal protections we can't access, political influence we can't match. Within 5 years, you could make the rest of us irrelevant. Is this a threat? Marco's hand tightened on his gun. It's an opportunity. Don Caruso leaned forward. The remaining families have a choice. We can fight you, a war we'll inevitably lose, or we can join you. Silence filled the cathedral. Isabella felt Marco's shock mirror her own. This wasn't what they'd expected. Join us how? She asked carefully. Valentina pulled out a folder remarkably similar to the ones Isabella had been working with for months. We've done our research on Adrian's vision, on what he was trying to build, and we think it's brilliant, dangerous, certainly, but brilliant. My father's generation built their empires on violence and fear, Don Caruso said. But times are changing. Law enforcement is more sophisticated. International cooperation makes hiding money harder, and the old ways are becoming unsustainable. Your brother saw that, and rather than fight the inevitable, he chose to evolve. Marco's expression was unreadable. So you want to legitimize alongside us? We want to propose an alliance, Valentina corrected. The Caruso family has shipping infrastructure, import licenses, international connections. You have real estate, construction, political leverage. Together we could create a legitimate business empire that rivals any corporation in Europe. And in exchange, Isabella asked, In exchange, you stop destroying families and start building coalitions. Bring the remaining operations under one umbrella, transition them all toward legitimacy. Valentina's eyes were sharp. It would require profit sharing, collaborative leadership, and trust between families that have been enemies for generations. Trust that could be broken the moment it becomes inconvenient, Marco said. Which is why we propose insurance. Don Caruso gestured to his daughter. Valentina's son, my grandson, is 20 years old. Brilliant businessman, no interest in the violent side of family operations. We propose a merger sealed by marriage between him and someone in your family who could serve as guarantee of good faith. Isabella felt Marco tense beside her, but before he could speak, she understood what was being offered. Not a threat, but a genuine proposal for transformation. You want to create a legitimate dynasty, she said slowly. Not just one family going straight, but a coalition of families reinventing themselves entirely. Exactly. Valentina's smile was sharp. And frankly, Mrs. Falcone, you're the key to making it work. Adrian's widow leading the transformation gives it legitimacy. Your business acumen, which we've been monitoring closely, proves you're capable of actually executing the vision. And your relationship with Marco provides the muscle to enforce cooperation when necessary. What relationship? Marco's voice was cold. Isabella is my brother's widow. Nothing more. But Isabella caught the slight emphasis on widow, the implication hovering in the air. She'd been careful to maintain public distance from Marco, but clearly the rumors persisted anyway. Don Caruso's knowing look confirmed it. Come now, Marco. We've all seen how you watch her. How she's the only person whose safety makes you paranoid. The nature of your relationship is your business. But the fact that you care about her opinion, that you've given her genuine power in your operations, that's what makes this proposal work. Because you think I'll keep Marco from destroying you if you step out of line, Isabella said. Because we think you'll build something worth not stepping out of line for. Valentina pulled out another document. This is a proposal for a joint venture, 50-50 partnership between Falcone and Caruso operations, with provisions for other families to buy in at reduced equity stakes. Within 2 years, we project completely legitimate revenue streams exceeding our current combined criminal earnings. Marco took the document, his eyes scanning the numbers with practiced efficiency. Isabella watched his expression shift from suspicion to interest despite himself. The proposal was good, better than good. It was exactly what they'd needed to accelerate Adrian's vision. You've put significant thought into this, Marco said finally. We've put 3 months of work into this, Don Caruso corrected. Ever since it became clear that your war would end with your victory, we decided it was better to join you than be destroyed by you. And the other families, the ones who won't want to legitimize, we let them die out naturally. No more wars, no more massacres, just business competition in legitimate markets that they can't adapt to. Valentina's tone was pragmatic. The old ways are ending, Marco. Your brother saw it first, but the rest of us are catching up. Isabella felt Marco's gaze on her, seeking her read on the situation. She reviewed everything she'd learned over the past 3 months. The business structures, the political landscape, the opportunities that would open up with Caruso infrastructure supporting Falcone capital. It could work, she said quietly. Not easily, not quickly, but with proper execution and genuine cooperation, this could accomplish in 2 years what would take us a decade alone. And you trust them? Marco's question was pointed. I trust that their self-interest aligns with ours, which is more reliable than trust based on loyalty or honor. Isabella met Valentina's eyes across the space between them. But I'd want guaranteed oversight, shared accounting, transparent operations, quarterly audits by independent firms. Acceptable, Valentina agreed immediately. We want the same protections. This only works if no one can hide assets or skim profits without everyone knowing. Marco was silent for a long moment, weighing the offer against years of instinctive suspicion. Isabella could see the war happening behind his eyes. The enforcer who trusted no one battling with the strategist who recognized genuine opportunity. I'll need time to review the full proposal, he said finally, and to consult with my advisors. Of course, Don Caruso stood, signaling the meeting's end. But Marco, understand, this offer has an expiration. Other families are watching to see what we do. If we can't reach agreement with you, they'll assume warfare is the only option. And while we'll lose that war, a lot of people will die first. Is that a threat? It's reality. The old man's voice was tired. I'm 73 years old, Marco. I've spent my entire life in this world, and I'm exhausted by it. Your brother offered a glimpse of something better, and I want to live long enough to see it built. So I'm asking you, not as a rival, but as a tired old criminal who wants one last chance at redemption, consider this seriously. The drive back to the palazzo was silent. Marco stared out the window, his jaw tight, while Isabella reviewed the proposal documents Valentina had provided. The numbers were solid, the timelines realistic, the partnership structure carefully balanced to prevent any one family from dominating. It was exactly what they needed, and that made Marco suspicious. Talk to me, Isabella said finally. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that 3 months ago, these same families would have celebrated my death. Now they want to be partners. Marco's laugh was bitter. Forgive me if I'm skeptical about their sudden change of heart. It's not sudden. It's calculated survival. Isabella set down the documents. You terrified them, Marco. You showed them that fighting you means total annihilation, so they're choosing the only option that lets them survive, cooperation. And when they decide cooperation is no longer profitable, then we'll have infrastructure in place to crush them economically instead of violently. Isabella touched his arm gently. This is what Adrian wanted, a way to compete through business instead of bloodshed. Marco turned to face her fully. Adrian's vision got him killed, Isabella. I won't let it get you killed too. Then make sure it doesn't. Isabella held his gaze. Build something so strong, so entrenched in legitimate power, that violence becomes pointless. Make the Falcone empire untouchable through legal means instead of fear. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's incredibly complex and will take years of constant vigilance. Isabella smiled slightly. But since when have you been afraid of complex challenges? Marco's expression softened, and he raised his scarred hand to cup her face. When they involve risking you. The moment stretched between them, loaded with 3 months of careful distance and growing feelings neither of them had fully acknowledged. Isabella knew she should pull away, maintain the boundaries that had kept things professional. But sitting here at the back of the car, having just negotiated what could be the future of the criminal underworld, she realized something. She'd made her decision weeks ago. She'd just been too afraid to admit it. Marco, she said softly, I think my time for thinking is over. His breath caught. Isabella, I choose this. I choose you. The words felt simultaneously terrifying and right. Not because I'm trapped or Stockholm Syndrome or any other excuse I've been making, but because when I imagine the future, the empire we're building, the transformation we're creating, you're in every version of it. Marco's thumb traced her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers for doubt. You're sure? Because once I have you, Isabella, I won't let you go. Ever. I'm sure. Isabella leaned into his touch. I love you, Marco Falcone, and I think I have for longer than I wanted to admit. The kiss was nothing like their desperate encounter 3 months ago. This was slower, deeper, a promise being made rather than a moment being stolen. Marco's hands framed her face like she was something precious, and Isabella felt herself melting into the certainty of choosing him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too, he said roughly. Have loved you since long before I had any right to. And I swear to you, Isabella, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. Just don't lock me in any more rooms. No more rooms. You have my word. Marco's smile was genuine, transforming his scarred face into something almost boyish. But I reserve the right to be insufferably overprotective when you do reckless things. I can live with that. They returned to the palazzo hand in hand, and the staff who witnessed their entrance exchanged knowing looks. Apparently everyone had been waiting for them to stop pretending their partnership was purely professional. Over the next 2 weeks, Marco and Isabella worked 18-hour days reviewing the Caruso proposal, consulting with lawyers and accountants, building safeguards into the partnership structure. They brought in the Falcone family's senior members, laying out the vision for transformation and requiring each person to commit or leave. Some left. Marco's uncle, who'd run enforcement operations for decades, took a generous retirement package and disappeared to the coast. A few of the older enforcers, unable to imagine life without violence, quietly departed for other families. But most stayed, drawn by the promise of legitimacy and the very real threat of what Marco would do to traitors. Isabella threw herself into the work with fierce determination, proving to the skeptics that she belonged in the strategy rooms. She negotiated terms with Valentina that protected Falcone interests while building genuine partnership. She presented the transformation plan to their political connections, leveraging Adrian's memory to gain support. And she worked beside Marco, their professional partnership now openly acknowledged as something deeper. 6 weeks after the cathedral meeting, they gathered representatives from 5 families in the Palazzo's grand ballroom, the same space where Adrian had died, now repurposed as the birthplace of something new. Don Caruso was there, along with Valentina and her son. The Barbieri family sent their matriarch, a shrewd woman in her 60s who controlled the gambling operations. The Rossis, no relation to Isabella's family, brought their chief financial officer, a genius at money laundering, who was eager to apply his skills legitimately. And the Torres family, who'd stayed neutral throughout Marco's war, sent their youngest son, a Harvard-educated lawyer who'd been waiting for his chance to modernize the family business. Marco stood at the front of the room, Isabella beside him, facing the assembled power structure of what remained of the city's underworld. 3 months ago, I could have destroyed every family in this room, he began, his voice carrying easily through the space. I had the power, the motivation, and the ruthlessness to wipe you all out and absorb your territories. The families shifted uncomfortably, but no one disputed his claim. My brother Adrian believed there was a better way, a way to transform what we are without destroying ourselves in the process. Marco's gaze swept across them. I thought he was naive, weak, too idealistic for this world, but in the months since his death, I've learned something. It takes far more strength to build something than to destroy it. Isabella watched the faces in the crowd, seeing skepticism war with hope. What we're proposing isn't easy, she said, stepping forward. It requires transparency we're not used to, cooperation between historical enemies, and genuine commitment to legitimacy. But the alternative is what? Endless warfare until law enforcement finally decides we're too much trouble and brings in federal resources we can't fight? The world is changing, Valentina added. We can change with it or be destroyed by it. For the next 3 hours, they presented the full transformation plan. The legitimate businesses that would serve as foundation. The criminal operations that would be phased out over 18 months. The profit-sharing structure that gave every participating family incentive to cooperate. The oversight mechanisms that would prevent cheating. And the political strategy that would make them too valuable to prosecute. By the time they finished, Isabella could see the shift happening. The old guard was dying, and the younger generation was ready for something different. Don Caruso stood slowly. I've lived in this world for over 50 years. I've ordered deaths, sanctioned violence, done things that will keep me awake at night until I die. But if there's a chance, even a small chance, to leave something better behind, I'm willing to take it. He looked at Marco. You have my family's commitment. Full partnership under the proposed terms. One by one, the other families agreed. Not because they trusted Marco, but because they recognized that cooperation was survival and resistance was death. As the meeting ended and families departed with copies of the partnership agreements, Isabella felt something like hope settle in her chest. This was real. They were actually doing this. Marco found her on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, watching the last of the black cars depart into the night. We did it, she said softly. We actually convinced them. You convinced them. I just looked threatening in the background. Marco wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her against his chest. You were magnificent in there, Isabella. Adrian would have been proud. The mention of Adrian brought a familiar pang of grief, but softer now than before. Isabella had spent months processing his death, mourning what could have been while building what actually was. Do you think he'd approve? She asked. Of us, I mean, of what we've become to each other. Marco was quiet for a moment. I think he'd understand. Adrian always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves, and he wanted you to be happy. His arms tightened slightly. He also told me, right before he died, that he wanted me to protect you. I don't think he meant just physically. You've protected my heart too, in your own complicated, overprotective way. Isabella turned in his arms to face him. When do you want to do this officially? Make us public? Are you asking me when I want to marry you? I'm asking when you think it's respectful to Adrian's memory. Isabella touched the scar on Marco's face gently. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. But I also want to honor what Adrian and I could have had. Then we wait one more year. Give it the full traditional mourning period. Marco's smile was soft. But I'm putting a ring on your finger tonight, Isabella. I'm not giving you any chance to change your mind. I won't change my mind. I know, but I'm a possessive man, remember? That night, Marco produced a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, platinum band with a single perfect diamond, elegant in its simplicity. He slipped it onto Isabella's finger in the privacy of her suite, and she felt the weight of the promise it represented. The year that followed was the hardest and most rewarding of Isabella's life. The transformation of 5 criminal families into a legitimate business empire required constant vigilance, endless negotiations, and the occasional application of Marco's particular brand of persuasion when someone tried to cheat the system. She worked alongside Valentina and the other family representatives, building corporate structures that could withstand legal scrutiny. She testified before city planning commissions about their urban development projects. She gave interviews to business publications about the revitalization of the city's industrial sector. And slowly, painfully, the Isabella Rossi who'd been sold into marriage transformed into Isabella Falcone, the business executive whose past was whispered about, but whose present was undeniable. Marco remained the enforcer when necessary, but his role shifted increasingly toward legitimate leadership. The skills that had made him a feared killer, strategic thinking, absolute determination, ability to read people, translated surprisingly well to boardroom negotiations. And having Isabella beside him, tempering his brutality with compassion while reinforcing his strength with her own, made him more effective than he'd ever been alone. They phased out the criminal operations ahead of schedule. Money laundering gave way to legitimate banking partnerships. Protection rackets transformed into private security firms. Gambling operations became licensed casinos. And the families who'd built their empires on violence found themselves, almost despite themselves, becoming respectable. Not everyone made the transition. Some of the old guard couldn't adapt, couldn't accept that the world they'd known was ending. But those who remained found that legitimacy brought advantages they'd never imagined: political access, legal protections, social acceptance that had been forever beyond reach when they were simply criminals. Isabella's sister Lucia recovered fully, her remission holding strong. Isabella brought her to the palazzo for visits, carefully keeping her away from the remaining darker elements of the empire. And Lucia, who'd worried so much about her sister's forced marriage, found herself charmed despite herself by the way Marco looked at Isabella, like she was the center of his entire world. The 1-year anniversary of Adrian's death was marked with a private ceremony at the family cemetery. Isabella stood beside his grave with Marco's hand in hers, and she spoke to the man she'd barely known, but whose death had shaped everything that came after. You were right about transformation, she said quietly, about there being a better way. I'm sorry I didn't get to know you well enough to tell you that myself, but I promise you, Adrian, we're building the future you dreamed of, and we're doing it in your honor. Marco placed fresh flowers on his brother's grave, his scarred face peaceful in a way Isabella rarely saw. I kept my promise, he said to the headstone. I protected her. And somehow she saved me too. 2 weeks later, in a private ceremony attended only by close family and allies, Isabella and Marco were married. Not in the Gothic villa where Adrian had died, but in a small chapel overlooking the sea, with flowers everywhere and music that made Isabella cry. She wore cream instead of white, a simple dress that made her feel beautiful without trying to pretend she was the innocent bride she'd been a year ago. And when Marco placed the wedding band beside her engagement ring, when he promised to love and protect her for the rest of his life, Isabella felt the last pieces of her past finally settle into peace. They honeymooned on a private island the family owned, 2 weeks of sunshine and isolation where they could be simply Marco and Isabella instead of the powerful couple transforming the criminal underworld. They talked about the future, children maybe, expanding internationally definitely, continuing to build Adrian's vision absolutely. And late one night, lying together under stars that seemed impossibly bright, Marco traced the curve of Isabella's face with gentle fingers. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. The way we started? The things I did to keep you? Isabella thought about the girl she'd been, entering the Falcone villa in a white dress and naive hope. She thought about the widow locked away, the prisoner becoming a partner, the woman who'd chosen love from the ruins of tragedy. "I regret that Adrian had to die," she said finally. "I regret the violence and loss that brought us here. But us? This partnership we've built? This life we're creating together? I don't regret choosing you, Marco. Not for a second. Even though I'm still a monster? You're my monster." Isabella smiled in the darkness. "And I'm the woman who looked at a killer and saw someone worth saving. We're quite a pair." "We are indeed." Marco pulled her closer, his scarred face peaceful in a way it never was in the city. "I love you, Isabella Falcone, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I love you too, and I'm proud of what we're building together." When they returned to the city, it was to news that the business coalition had exceeded all revenue projections. The legitimate empire they'd built was thriving, employing thousands, contributing to urban renewal, and fundamentally changing the city's economic landscape. At a gala celebrating the coalition's first successful year, Isabella stood beside Marco accepting congratulations from politicians and business leaders who had no idea of the bloody history underlying the empire they were praising. She looked around the glittering ballroom, so different from the one where Adrian had died, and felt satisfaction settle in her bones. They'd done it. They'd actually transformed everything. Valentina Caruso approached, champagne glass in hand, her expression warmly approving. "Quite a change from last year's charity gala." "That's one way to describe not getting shot at," Isabella said dryly. "Your husband is watching you like a hawk, by the way. I think he's still paranoid about public events." Isabella glanced at Marco, who was indeed scanning the crowd with constant vigilance, despite the party's peaceful nature. "Old habits die hard." "They do indeed. But Isabella, I wanted to tell you what you've built here, what you and Marco have accomplished together. It's extraordinary. My father cries sometimes, Says he never thought he'd live to see the families legitimized. We couldn't have done it without the coalition, without everyone committing to the transformation. But you were the catalyst. You and your stubborn refusal to just be a victim." Valentina's smile was genuine. "Adrian started the vision, but you made it real." After Valentina moved on, Isabella made her way to Marco's side. He immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Enjoying yourself," he murmured. "Actually, yes. Is that strange? That you're finding joy at a party full of reformed criminals and corrupt politicians?" "A little." Marco's smile was soft. "But I like seeing you happy." "I am happy." Isabella leaned into him, feeling safe despite the crowd. "Are you?" Marco considered the question seriously. "I spent most of my life believing happiness wasn't meant for people like me, that I was destined to be the family's weapon until I died violently like everyone else who chose this life. But then you happened, and you were so stubborn about making me see a different future that eventually I started believing it might be possible." "So is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Marco pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved me, Isabella. From myself, from the darkness, from the endless cycle of violence. And I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for that." Isabella thought about all the ways they'd saved each other, Marco pulling her from literal gunfire, while Isabella pulled him toward hope and transformation. They were partners in the truest sense, balanced in their strengths and weaknesses, building something neither could have created alone. 3 years later, Isabella stood in the Palazzo's nursery, holding their daughter while Marco read quarterly reports that showed continued growth across all business sectors. The criminal empire that had claimed so many lives had fully transformed into something legitimate, something Adrian would have been proud of. Their daughter, named Adriana, for the uncle she'd never meet, cooed happily, completely unaware of the darkness that had preceded her birth. She would grow up in a world her parents had fought to create, one where the Falcone name meant business excellence instead of blood and violence. "The Torres family just closed the Madrid acquisition," Marco reported, looking up from his tablet, "and Valentina is expanding into Asian markets next quarter." "Good. That diversification will help long-term stability." Isabella shifted Adriana to her other arm. "How are the youth employment programs doing?" "Better than projected. We've placed over 300 at-risk young people in apprenticeships across coalition businesses." Marco's smile was proud. Your idea of using our resources to prevent the next generation from entering criminal life is working. It was Isabella's particular passion, ensuring that kids growing up in the same desperate circumstances that had once produced soldiers for crime families now had legitimate opportunities instead. She'd established education programs, job training, mentorship initiatives, all funded by the coalition's profits. Breaking the cycle. That's what she called it. Making sure that transformation wasn't just about the families at the top, but about creating real change in the communities that had suffered most from organized crime. Marco set aside his work and moved to join her, wrapping his arms around both Isabella and their daughter. Have I told you today that I love you? Only twice. You're falling behind your usual rate. Then let me remedy that. I love you, Isabella Falcone. I love the empire we've built, the family we're creating, and the future that's possible because you refuse to accept the darkness as inevitable. Isabella leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her spine. I love you too, even when you're being overprotective. Especially when I'm being overprotective, Marco corrected. It's one of my most charming qualities. Looking back, Isabella could trace the impossible journey from that night in the villa, blood on marble floors and a husband dying in her arms, to this moment of perfect peace. The path had been brutal, marked by violence and loss, and choices that still sometimes kept her awake at night. But they'd built something real from the ruins, something that honored Adrian's memory while creating opportunities he'd only dreamed of, something that proved transformation was possible even in the darkest circumstances. The Falcone Empire stood now as testament to the power of choosing hope over vengeance, partnership over domination, and love over the endless cycle of violence that had defined it for generations. And at the center of that transformation stood Isabella, no longer a scared girl sold into marriage, but a woman who'd forged her own destiny from impossible circumstances. She was the widow who'd refused to be just a symbol, the prisoner who'd demanded agency, the woman who'd looked at a monster and seen someone worth saving, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. That night, after Adriana was asleep and the business reports were filed, Isabella and Marco stood together on their private balcony overlooking the city. Lights stretched out before them like fallen stars, each one representing lives being lived, dreams being chased, futures being built. Do you think we've done enough? Isabella asked quietly. To make up for what came before? I don't know if we can ever fully make up for the violence of the past, Marco said honestly. But we're building something better for the future, and maybe that's enough. Adrian would say it is. Adrian would be proud of you, of us, of everything we've accomplished. Marco's arm tightened around her waist. I only wish he could have seen it. Isabella thought about the gentleman she'd married and barely known, whose death had catalyzed everything that came after. I think he sees it, somehow, and I think he's at peace knowing that his vision lived on. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light. The journey had cost them both more than they'd ever imagined, had transformed them in ways that could never be undone. But standing here now, with the empire they'd built stretching out before them, and the family they'd created sleeping peacefully inside, Isabella knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would choose this path again, would choose Marco again, would choose the hard work of transformation over the easy surrender to darkness. Because in the end, that's what love was. Not the beautiful lie of her first wedding, but the hard-won truth of choosing someone every single day despite the complications and challenges, of building something real from impossible circumstances, of refusing to let tragedy define the future. Isabella Falcone had entered the criminal underworld as a sacrifice. She'd survived as a prisoner, she'd emerged as a partner, and she'd transformed it all into something her daughter would inherit with pride instead of shame. That was worth everything it had cost. And she would defend it with the same fierce determination that had carried her through the darkest moments of her journey. The widow had become a queen, and the empire she ruled alongside her scarred king was finally, genuinely, free.